Hey guys, tonight we're setting off into the kind of cold that doesn't politely nip your nose, it swallows you whole and chews on your willpower for dessert. This is the kind of journey where snow isn't scenery, but a living thing that judges every step you take. And you probably won't survive this, at least not without a few tricks that medieval pilgrims swore by, like stuffing hay into their tunics or rubbing fat onto their faces before dawn. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country and local time in the comments. I'd love to see how far this little frozen pilgrimage travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the half-light before dawn, that strange, colorless hour where the frost hasn't yet decided whether it's fog or solid ice. You walk along a narrow path of packed snow that crunches underfoot like crumbling glass, the breath leaving your mouth in small ghosts that hang around just long enough to remind you that your body is warmer than the world. The road to Santiago or Canterbury, or maybe even Jerusalem, depending on which medieval century you've been misplaced in, is less a route and more a slow conversation with discomfort. The chill isn't just physical, it feels like a test of moral endurance, the kind that teaches humility through numb toes and frozen bread. In some half-remembered manuscript, a monk wrote that every frostbitten finger was a tithe paid to the heavens. You can almost imagine him saying it with his hand wrapped in rags, his quill trembling as he scribbled beside a candle stub. The pilgrims of the Middle Ages weren't built for this kind of weather. Not really. Most came from milder valleys and coastal towns, places where frost was a guest, not a landlord. Yet here you are, following their footprints through the Alps or the Pyrenees, discovering that preparation meant very different things in a world without Gore-Tex or common sense. You tighten the rope belt around your wool tunic, already stiff with last night's dew, and realize that layering was more of a spiritual exercise than a scientific one. You think about how they believed that heat could be trapped by faith alone, that maybe if you carried a relic of a saint, you'd be immune to frostbite because holiness radiated warmth. It's almost poetic, until the wind shifts and bites through your layers like gossip. The first hour of walking becomes an inventory of what hurts, fingertips, then nose, then dignity. Every step makes the snow squeal, a noise so consistent it starts to sound like a prayer rhythm, the steady repetition of survival. Somewhere in the distance a church bell echoes across the white valley, muffled and haunting, as if time itself is reluctant to move in this cold. You pass a group of fellow travelers, a tangle of cloaks, staffs, and the faint smell of damp wool, and realize that the medieval idea of group warmth was not friendship but physics. People pressed together under one blanket, often without speaking, because conversation wasted heat. The chronicler Odoric Vitalis once complained that pilgrims share warmth as sinners share shame, which honestly might be the first documented burn in travel writing. You stop for a moment to adjust the strap of your pack, which carries your rations, black bread, a wedge of salted cheese, and something that might have once been an apple before winter had its say. Your water is half ice, half regret. To keep it from freezing solid, you hold the flask under your cloak near your stomach, a move recommended by monks who also insisted on fasting during these trips. You can't help but smile at the contradiction, hungry, freezing, and yet somehow closer to God. The first serious hill arrives without warning. The air grows sharper, cleaner, but crueler. Every breath feels like inhaling broken glass, and yet, strangely, it's addictive. The pain makes you feel alive, and the sound of your heartbeat is louder than your doubts. You remember that one mainstream historical fact tucked in a chronicle of 12th century Alpine travelers. Guides used to smear animal fat on their faces to prevent frostburn, and sometimes on their eyelids to keep them from freezing shut during night marches. You try not to think about how unsanitary that sounds, but it worked. The monks of Cluny wrote recipes for holy ointments that mixed lard with ash or powdered herbs, claiming the smell kept demons and probably wolves away. Somewhere between faith and practicality, you realize they invented medieval sunscreen for cold weather. As the path rises, so does your awareness that you're walking through someone else's nightmare turned pilgrimage. The snow turns blue under the weak light, and you can't tell where the mountain ends and the sky begins. There's a moment when silence becomes heavier than noise, a kind of pressure in your ears that makes you think of the phrase thin air. Every few steps you pause to catch your breath, and the cold seeps into your bones faster than you can will it out. In those moments, you understand why some medieval travelers described frost as God's whisper made visible. It's beautiful and cruel in equal measure. You imagine a line of weary pilgrims stretching across centuries, each one hunched against the wind, each one muttering prayers that probably sound just like your quiet curses. You come across the remnants of an old waymarker, a wooden post half buried in ice, carved with something unreadable. In the 13th century, monks and local shepherds built these along treacherous passes, each marked with a cross, or the symbol of a local saint, meant to remind travelers that they weren't entirely alone. Modern scholars still debate whether these markers doubled as emergency shelters, or were purely symbolic. Either way, the idea of being guided by faith instead of GPS feels both comforting and ridiculous. You lean against the post and realize it hums faintly in the wind, like a flute tuned by frost. A small stream appears beside the trail, still running beneath a thin lid of ice. You kneel beside it, your knees sinking into snow, and break through the crust with your gloved hand. The water tastes metallic, ancient, like something filtered through centuries of prayer and geology. You think about how pilgrims carried little brass scallop shells, symbols of completion, often using them to scoop water or soup or whatever passed for nourishment. Some shells were said to glow faintly in moonlight, a legend tied to St. James's supposed miracles, though one quirky tidbit from a 14th century diary suggests the glow came from phosphorescent barnacles stuck to them. It's oddly fitting that devotion and marine biology got mixed up somewhere along the way. Hours pass in slow motion. The sun rises, pale and embarrassed, barely warming the snow at all. You feel its light on your face, but not its heat, like an apology that doesn't quite reach the heart. Around midday, you find a clearing where someone has built a crude shelter of branches and cloth, an abandoned camp, perhaps, or a mercy station from a previous traveler. You step inside, half expecting relics or bones, but only find a few burnt sticks, a frozen footprint, and something that looks like a spoon carved from antler. You pocket it without thinking, because even small artifacts feel like luck in this barren world. It's strange how humans cling to tokens, a feather, a charm, a piece of wood, when logic has long since frozen over. You eat the last of your bread, which now resembles a brick more than food, and remember how some pilgrims used to tuck bread under their armpits to soften it before chewing. It sounds absurd, but necessity makes you creative. You decide to try it, and the result is somehow worse than expected but still edible. As the wind howls outside your little shelter, you recall an open scholarly debate about whether medieval fasting rituals during pilgrimage were truly spiritual or just the result of spoiled food. Some historians insist that holy hunger was self-imposed. Others point out that anyone eating dried fish in February had no choice. Either way, the result was the same: empty stomachs and a lot of prayer. When you leave the shelter, the temperature has dropped again. The horizon looks like a frozen ocean of light, and your shadow stretches long and thin over the snow. You realize that survival isn't dramatic. It's monotonous. It's the discipline of walking when you'd rather lie down. It's the quiet math of conserving breath, saving the last match, finding beauty in frost because hating it takes too much energy. You think about the monk who wrote, "The frost is a teacher, and its lesson is silence." You can't argue with that. The crunch of your boots becomes your mantra, and somewhere behind you the wind erases your footprints one by one. The day ends as it began, with that same indifferent chill, the same echo of bells from some unseen chapel below the pass. You make camp in the shallow hollow of a drift, wrapping yourself in your cloak, your thoughts, and the faint memory of warmth. The stars appear slowly, cold and sharp, and each one feels like an eye watching from a world where frost is eternal. You curl up, breathing into your sleeve, and the world narrows to the small sound of your heartbeat beneath layers of wool. Tomorrow, you'll climb higher, walk farther, and pretend the cold is prayer again. But for now, in this suspended silence, you simply exist, a pilgrim of ice, a flicker of warmth in an endless winter. You wake before dawn, because the cold doesn't let you sleep, it just lets you shiver quietly, in between dreams about warmth. The snow around your little hollow has stiffened overnight, trapping you like an artifact waiting to be discovered centuries later by some confused archaeologist who will shake their head and mutter something about poor footwear choices. When you stand, your joints creak like frozen hinges, and your breath curls into the air in tiny loops of fog. It's one of those mornings when the world seems paused, soundless, suspended between one frost and the next. Your first thought is food, and your second thought is regret, because what's left in your satchel wouldn't satisfy a saint, let alone a hungry traveler with delusions of holiness. You nibble on what could either be cheese or wax, and it squeaks between your teeth. The road waits, as roads always do, pretending it's easy. You start walking, each step breaking the crust of snow that formed overnight. The crunching is rhythmic, 1, 2, 1, 2, and it almost feels meditative until your toes start reminding you they exist. Medieval pilgrims walked in shoes that weren't exactly built for survival. You glance down at your own imagined pair of wooden sandals, clumsy, flat, more philosophy than function, and wonder how anyone managed to cross mountain passes wearing these glorified cutting boards. Some travelers wrapped their feet in cloth or straw. Others, apparently less attached to logic, believed that pain was part of purification. There's even a record from a 13th century bishop complaining that too many pilgrims died in sandals as though heaven preferred bare feet. A mainstream historical fact, if you can call it that, is that wooden pattens, thick-soled overshoes were often worn in muddy towns but useless in snow, yet pilgrims brought them anyway, because habit is stronger than weather. The cold gnaws at you with a persistence that's almost admirable. You flex your fingers and remember how medieval manuscripts described wind spirits that entered through the nails and had to be banished with charms or ointments. Somewhere in northern France, monks sold windstopper beads that looked suspiciously like polished pebbles. You can imagine a tired traveler, broke and half frozen, handing over their last coin for a rock someone promised would stop the chill from reaching their bones. You can laugh now, but if someone offered you a warm rock, you'd probably buy it too. Faith, after all, is the original survival strategy. The climb grows steeper, and every muscle burns with that strange, clean ache that only cold can create. You pass an old milestone half buried in frost, carved with a faded scallop shell. It's a symbol of completion, a promise that if you keep walking, something holy will eventually notice. The idea that pilgrimage could cleanse sin by physical suffering wasn't just poetic, it was policy. Medieval church doctrine loved the idea of purification through discomfort. Every blister was a confession, every frozen toe a psalm. There's a certain irony in realizing that salvation for many came with trench foot. Around midday, the light sharpens. Snowflakes catch the sun and flicker like embers in reverse. Tiny burning points of cold. You pull your hood lower and notice that your shadow, long and faint, looks thinner than it did yesterday, as if the cold itself has started erasing you. You find a rock and sit, grateful for any excuse to stop moving and study the world around you. White ridges, distant peaks, the low drone of wind through a valley that could swallow whole histories. You take a deep breath and exhale slowly, watching it freeze midair. There's a strange beauty in the idea that every pilgrim who's ever walked this path has left behind clouds of frozen breath, millions of tiny invisible offerings suspended somewhere in the air. You take out a piece of parchment you've been carrying, something you found wedged in that shelter yesterday. The ink has blurred, but one line remains legible. Cold is the truest confessor, for it accepts no excuses. You smile at the blunt honesty of it. Medieval people had a knack for turning misery into metaphor. Some even claimed that frost could measure faith, because the devout never froze as quickly as the doubtful. It's one of those open scholarly debates historians still argue about. Were such claims genuine belief or clever propaganda to encourage persistence on the road? The truth, like most things buried under snow, is probably somewhere in between. The wind shifts again, bringing with it the faint smell of pine resin and something smoky, perhaps a monastery ahead, or just your imagination trying to invent warmth. You keep walking, drawn by that scent the way moths chase light. The ground begins to sparkle, and you realize you're crossing a stretch of ice that's dusted with fresh snow, treacherous enough to turn even the most pious step into slapstick. You move carefully, balancing your staff in front of you like a tightrope walker. Somewhere behind you, the wind seems to whisper a complaint, or maybe it's just your cloak sighing against itself. You pass another traveler, a ghost of a figure wrapped in a woolen shroud, face hidden, staff leaning heavily to one side. You don't speak, of course. Nobody does out here. Words feel too warm to waste. You simply nod and keep moving, both of you bound by the same quiet agreement. Survival is solitary, even in company. Later, when you glance back, the figure is gone. The trail behind you is blank, erased by wind. You're starting to think frost has a sense of humor. As the afternoon deepens, you reach a frozen stream where the ice creaks like old wood under your boots. You kneel again, because curiosity is stronger than fear, and crack the surface with your staff. Beneath it, the water runs black and silent. You cup a little in your hand and taste it. It's shockingly pure, like licking glass. You imagine the medieval pilgrims doing the same, their lips blue, their faith unshaken. A quirky tidbit from a 15th century traveler's diary claimed that water under ice is holier than wine, because it has seen heaven's breath. You can't help but smirk at that. It's the kind of thing that sounds profound until you realize someone probably said it to justify drinking from puddles. By twilight, your sandals, if they can still be called that, have stiffened into wooden relics of their former selves. You stop to examine the straps, and find them frayed, frostbitten, brittle. You imagine medieval pilgrims trying to fix theirs with twine or strips of bark, muttering prayers to Saint Christopher, the patron of travelers, who must have been exhausted from hearing the same complaints for centuries. You sit on a rock, rubbing your feet, and think about how every faith system has its own version of frostbite, the little sufferings that no one canonizes but everyone endures. The stars come out early, glittering like a field of cold nails hammered into the sky. You light a small tallow candle inside your hood to keep your face warm, a trick learned from some forgotten handbook of monastic travel. The light wobbles with every breath, but it's enough to give your shadow edges again. You hum softly, something tuneless but rhythmic, because silence feels heavier at night. The sound echoes oddly off the snow, like it's being swallowed and reflected at the same time. You remember an old superstition that said songs could tame frost, but only if sung without words. It's a superstition you're happy to test. Your body moves slower now. Every step feels ceremonial, like you're performing an ancient ritual no one remembers, but everyone instinctively knows. The path curves around a ridge, revealing a wide valley below, silvered under moonlight. It looks peaceful from a distance, but you know better. The temperature drops sharply. Your eyelashes freeze together for a heartbeat, and when you blink, they break apart with a tiny crack. There's something humbling about realizing that your own body becomes a sculpture in weather like this. You find a small alcove in the rocks and decide to rest there for the night. It's not shelter, so much as less exposure, but that's enough. You scrape snow into a shallow pit, light your candle again, and watch the flame dance in defiance of logic. The wax drips onto your hand, stinging briefly, and you welcome the pain because it means you're still here. Somewhere, centuries away, a historian will write about pilgrims surviving mountain winters with nothing but sandals and faith, and they'll wonder if maybe the two were the same thing. You pull your cloak tighter, curl up, and listen as the wind plays its endless song across the peaks. The sound is almost like breathing, almost like prayer. You think about those who walked before you, about the absurd bravery it takes to believe that devotion is stronger than frost. Your sandals, ridiculous and wooden, rest beside you, silent witnesses to a lesson the cold keeps teaching. Faith doesn't always keep you warm, but it does keep you walking. And as your eyes grow heavy, the snow begins to fall again, soft and endless, wrapping you in a silence older than language. When you wake again, your breath sounds different. It's slower, heavier, almost visible in the dim gray morning, like a small animal clinging to the air before vanishing. Every exhale feels like surrender, every inhale like defiance. You lie there for a moment beneath your stiff cloak, staring at the frosted stone ceiling of your rocky alcove, and realize you've begun to breathe with intention, as though oxygen has become a form of prayer. Medieval pilgrims, those brave or foolish enough to wander through mountains like this, believed that breathing itself was a spiritual act. Monastic treatises from the 12th century wrote that the soul travels with the breath and warms the body with faith. You're not sure how theological thermoregulation works, but you figure it's worth trying. You take one deep breath in through the nose, let it sting all the way down, and release it slowly, watching the tiny white cloud escape as though testing its wings. There's something poetic about the idea that in the coldest of places, your body still insists on creating vapor, a small defiance against a frozen world. You pull yourself upright and stretch, joints protesting like rusted hinges, and look out across the valley. Everything glitters under a thin crust of new snow, the kind that looks gentle until you realize it hides ice beneath. The path ahead curves upward into mist, disappearing into the colorless void where the mountains and sky have agreed to share the same shade of exhaustion. You chew on a piece of hard cheese that's now more weapon than meal, and set off again, leaving a trail of shallow footprints that the wind begins erasing almost immediately. There's a strange comfort in knowing the cold won't remember you. As you walk, you notice how your breath changes rhythm with the terrain, short and sharp when climbing, long and whispering when the slope eases. Medieval medical texts actually advised travelers to breathe in rhythm with the heart, lest the lungs freeze, a recommendation that sounds absurd until you feel your chest tighten and realize they weren't entirely wrong. You try to match your breathing to your steps, 4 paces in, 4 out. It becomes a pattern, hypnotic, something between meditation and survival instinct. A few centuries later, some scholar would call it controlled respiration for thermic endurance, but the pilgrims had a simpler name, the prayer of the lungs. The air smells different up here. Cleaner, yes, but thinner too, like something that's been filtered too many times through stone and snow. You can almost taste the minerals, the metallic hint of glacial dust. Your breath crystallizes faster now, little halos forming around your mouth before shattering into invisible shards. It's mesmerizing, and in a strange way, beautiful. You wonder if that's what medieval poets meant when they wrote about seeing the soul leave the lips. One anonymous 14th century verse describes the winter pilgrim as a chimney of God's warmth, smoking prayers into the sky. You try not to laugh, but it's oddly accurate. A ridge rises ahead of you, its surface slick and glassy. You stab your walking staff into the snow for balance, climbing one deliberate step at a time. The wind picks up and turns feral, slicing across your face like cold silk. It steals your breath before you can finish exhaling, and for a moment you feel panic, the ancient kind that predates reason. You crouch, pressing your body close to the snow, and force yourself to breathe again. Slow, steady, deliberate. That's when you remember one quirky tidbit from a monastic survival guide written by a certain Brother Martin of Burgundy, who claimed that pilgrims should breathe through wool to warm the air before it entered their lungs. According to him, you could avoid freezing breath by holding your sleeve to your mouth and exhaling into it before inhaling again. You try it, and for once medieval pseudoscience feels like genius. Warmth blooms, faint but real, inside the pocket of air between you and your sleeve. You imagine Brother Martin, somewhere in heaven, smugly nodding in approval. As you regain your rhythm, you notice a cluster of trees ahead. Thin pines, black against the snow. Their needles glitter with frost, and every gust sends a soft rain of ice crystals cascading to the ground. You rest beneath one, leaning your back against its trunk, and close your eyes. The wind hums through the branches like a monk's low chant. It's strange how the world simplifies out here, breathing, moving, staying alive. You think about how pilgrims wrote of finding God in the breath, not in churches or relics, but in the act of enduring cold and still managing to exhale. Maybe faith, you realize, isn't about warmth, it's about not giving up your breath to the wind too easily. There's a patch of sunlight breaking through the cloud cover now. The kind of pale gold that looks warm from a distance but lies completely to your face. You hold your hand out, and the light trembles across your fingers, caught on a layer of frost. It's oddly humbling to realize that even sunlight struggles here. The ancient chroniclers described mountain cold as a test of humility, and now you understand why there's no arrogance in shivering. You breathe again, slower this time, and watch as your breath curls up toward the sunlight, dissolving into it like incense smoke. Far ahead, you spot movement. A group of travelers making their way along the ridge. They're bundled in layers of wool and fur, moving in single file, their breaths rising like a small army of clouds. You quicken your pace, half out of curiosity and half for the illusion of companionship. When you catch up, you realize they're silent, faces hidden, bodies bent against the wind. They nod but don't speak, and you fall in behind them. Together, you form a kind of breathing symphony. Inhale, step, exhale, crunch. It's almost comforting, the sound of synchronized survival. After an hour, they veer off toward a valley and vanish into the white, leaving you alone again, your own breath now louder in the silence. As the day drags on, your lips begin to crack, and each breath burns just a little. You recall that medieval pilgrims sometimes carried tiny pouches of herbs, rosemary, mint, or even crushed cloves, to warm the mouth and clear the chest. Some believed the scent drove out cold humors, though modern medicine would call it aromatherapy with delusions of grandeur. You crush a bit of snow in your hand, pretending it's medicine, and let it melt on your tongue. It's tasteless but strangely satisfying, like chewing on endurance itself. The wind grows erratic again, switching direction like an indecisive deity. You find yourself walking sideways, shoulders hunched, eyes narrowed against the sting. In that moment, breathing becomes warfare. You versus the air. You versus your own body's instinct to curl inward. You remember one open scholarly debate about whether medieval pilgrims actually understood hypothermia or simply mistook it for divine rapture. Some described feeling the warmth of heaven before collapsing into snow, a phrase that has puzzled historians for centuries. You can't help but wonder if that warmth was simply the body's last cruel trick before freezing. Either way, the idea that death and transcendence could share the same symptom feels hauntingly poetic. As dusk falls, the temperature dives again. You find a hollow between two boulders and settle there, pulling your cloak tightly around you. Each breath feels thicker now, slower. You blow into your hands, watching frost bloom across your knuckles, and it occurs to you that you've spent an entire day thinking about breathing. It's absurd, and yet somehow it's all that matters. The monks were right, in their roundabout way. Breath is the bridge between flesh and endurance, every inhale a reminder that your body still believes in survival, every exhale a quiet refusal to surrender. You tilt your head back and exhale one last long plume toward the sky. It drifts upward, twisting, breaking apart into tiny white wisps. For a moment it catches the last bit of dying sunlight, glowing faintly pink before disappearing. You imagine it joining the millions of other breaths left here by travelers centuries ago. An invisible cathedral built from human persistence. The cold watches, silent, unimpressed but patient, and as you close your eyes, your chest rising and falling beneath layers of frost-dusted wool, you think that maybe surviving the night isn't about defeating the cold at all. It's about remembering how to breathe inside it. By morning, the hunger arrives before the light does. It's the kind of hunger that hums in your bones rather than your stomach. The slow gnawing ache that makes your thoughts taste like bread. The first few breaths you take are dry and tight, as if the air itself has been chewed thin by the cold. You sit up in the shallow hollow where you slept, your cloak stiff as bark, and watch the horizon try to turn from black to gray. Somewhere deep in your pack there's a crust of bread that would probably break a tooth, but you save it for later, not out of strategy but superstition. Pilgrims believed that eating before the first light of dawn offended certain angels who guarded the mountain passes. Whether those angels ever forgave anyone is unclear, but you figure it's best not to test celestial patience on an empty stomach. When the wind settles for a moment, you hear the faintest drip. Water thawing somewhere nearby. That sound is irresistible. You follow it, your boots crunching through a crust of ice, until you find a shallow stream hiding under a patchwork of snow. The water is impossibly clear, the kind that looks clean enough to confess to. You kneel, breaking through the frost with your staff, and cup some into your hands. The cold is vicious and beautiful, biting at your skin like truth. You drink anyway, letting it burn a clean path down your throat. Then the thought comes, what if you could make it warm? What if for once you didn't just endure the cold but cooked something out of it? You set your pack down and rummage through the few things you have. A dented iron pot, a scrap of cloth, and a handful of pebbles you collected days ago. Not because they were special, but because pilgrims sometimes carried smooth stones for counting prayers or distracting hunger. You've read, or maybe dreamed, that medieval travelers made stone soup in dire situations. Heat a rock, add water, stir an imagination, and call it faith. It's absurd, but absurdity has never stopped a starving human. You collect a few dry twigs from beneath a pine and build a nest of kindling, coaxing a small flame to life with your last scrap of candle stub. The smoke curls upward, a fragile promise against the endless sky. As the pot begins to warm, you drop the stones in and watch the water cloud slightly around them. You've made snow soup, essentially. Thin, translucent, more idea than meal. The smell is nothing, the taste less than nothing, but the act of stirring it feels strangely sacred. You imagine those early pilgrims crouched beside their fires, turning pebbles into hope one swirl at a time. One mainstream historical account from a 13th-century abbey in Burgundy describes travelers making pilgrim broth from melted snow, bark scrapings and whatever crumbs they had left, believing that hardship itself flavored the meal. Monks wrote that hunger teaches gratitude to the tongue. You can't help but laugh softly as you take a sip. The tongue, you think, might disagree. The first swallow is shockingly cold, but then the warmth from the pot catches up, creeping through you like a secret. You pour another spoonful into your mouth, close your eyes, and let yourself imagine it's stew, something with beans, maybe garlic, maybe mercy. The mind is a decent cook when it has to be. In your imagination, a medieval peasant version of yourself nods approvingly from across the fire, clutching his own bowl of wishful thinking. You offer a silent toast to him, then take another mouthful. It's terrible, but it's something. The sun finally breaches the ridge. Low and pale, you hold your pot toward it like an offering, the steam mingling with the weak light. In the distance, the mountains rise in perfect indifference, stone saints unmoved by hunger. You wonder how many travelers have died in these passes, clutching their bowls hoping for warmth that never came. Some left behind relics, wooden spoons, broken beads, half-burned sandals that archaeologists now catalog like holy curiosities. One open scholarly debate still lingers. Were these objects dropped by accident or offered deliberately as sacrifices to appease the spirits of the cold? A few historians argue that these offerings might have been proto-scientific, early attempts at pattern recognition. Leave something, they thought, and maybe you won't freeze next time. It's religion by way of risk management. When the last of your soup has evaporated into memory, you refill the pot with clean snow, this time adding a sliver of bark and one of the flatter pebbles. The bark releases a faint, woody aroma, not pleasant exactly, but alive. You think of the monastic travelers who wrote down recipes like these in their journals, often describing them as feasts of humility. There's humor in that, too, the kind that warms you just enough to keep moving. You pack your pot, pocket your best-looking stone, a lucky one perhaps, and continue up the trail. By midday, the hunger sharpens again, turning from ache to personality. The landscape flattens briefly into a wind-swept plateau, where patches of grass poke through the snow like the last thoughts of summer. You kneel and pluck a few, chewing them experimentally. They taste like earth pretending to be hope. You swallow anyway. Somewhere in a medieval field manual, because of course there was one, a wandering monk advised travelers to chew snow for patience, grass for humility. You're starting to suspect that most medieval survival advice was just creative branding for starvation. Still, the ritual comforts you. You find a small shrine built into a rock wall, a weathered wooden box housing a carved figure of a saint, whose face has been rubbed smooth by centuries of desperate hands. At its base lie offerings, bits of cloth, coins, even a half-eaten apple frozen solid. You add one of your pebbles to the pile, because that's what pilgrims do, trade one absurd hope for another. You press your hand to the wooden figure and feel the cold seep into your palm, as if the saint himself is reminding you not to expect warmth from faith alone. The wind picks up again in the afternoon, sharper now, carrying flakes of ice that sting like salt. You hunch forward and keep walking, thinking of how medieval chroniclers described snow not as weather but as personality. The white tyrant, one wrote, that mocks hunger by feeding the eye. You can see what he meant. The world is blindingly beautiful, and that beauty feels cruel. The snow glitters like sugar, the sky like porcelain, and somewhere deep inside you, your body still believes food will come from either one. Eventually, you reach a cluster of abandoned stone huts, half buried in drifts. Inside, there's a collapsed hearth, and the faint smell of smoke, proof that someone, sometime, beat the odds. You set your pack down and decide to stay for the night. You rebuild the fire carefully, feeding it with bits of broken wood from the doorframe, and melt snow again in your pot. This time, you add a handful of crushed pine needles, remembering that some medieval travelers brewed forest tea for strength. The taste is sharp, bitter, almost medicinal, but it fills the air with a green scent that feels alive against all this white. You sip slowly, savoring the illusion of vitality. For a moment, you could almost believe that this barren world has been tamed. You think about the pilgrims who would have done the same, those nameless thousands who walked until the mountains turned them into memories. There's something humbling in knowing that survival itself can be a form of prayer, that even melting snow for soup could count as worship. You stare into your pot, watching the steam rise and twist into the air, and imagine it carrying every prayer that's ever been whispered in hunger. Maybe that's what made snow soup sacred. It wasn't about nourishment, it was about the act of creating warmth where none existed. As night folds over the mountains, you lie beside your small fire, belly full of boiled bark and pride, and listen to the wood pop softly. The stars glimmer overhead, cold and endless. Your breath mingles with the smoke, curling into the dark like incense. Somewhere out there the wind still prowls, but for now it passes you by. You think about the monk's old phrase, "To eat snow is to taste heaven's patience." You're not sure about heaven, but patience you understand. And as sleep steals over you, you dream of warm kitchens that never existed, of soup that never froze, of a world where every pebble you dropped into the pot turned into bread. When you wake, the fire is gone, but the smell of smoke still clings to you, a faint perfume of survival. The ashes glow faintly, stubborn little embers refusing to admit defeat. You sit up slowly, brush frost from your sleeves, and realize the wind outside sounds different today. Less of a whistle, more of a whisper. There's something unnerving about that. Medieval pilgrims used to call it the devil's wind, a superstition born from too many nights spent listening to air that seemed to think for itself. The chronicles describe it as a wind that hunts light, always searching for candles to extinguish, as though darkness had its own appetite. You smile at the drama of it. People in the Middle Ages could turn a draft into a demon, but you also find yourself reaching for your own candle, because ridicule only lasts until the next gust. You light it carefully, shielding the flame with your hand, and the flicker instantly becomes a heartbeat in the dark. It's barely dawn. The air feels like ground glass against your cheeks, each breath cutting slightly deeper than the last. The hut you slept in is now more ruin than shelter, its stones creaking as though the frost itself is prying them apart. You pack your things quickly, tucking the candle into your cloak like a relic. Out here, light isn't luxury, it's identity. You step outside, and the world is blue, a faint, almost metallic color that makes everything seem distant and unreal. Your breath rises in small clouds, and for a moment, you watch them drift upward to join the same cold heavens that have watched pilgrims shiver for centuries. The trail today winds through a narrow ravine, its walls slick with ice, the sky above reduced to a sliver of pale gray. The wind funnels through it like a living thing, sudden, violent, unpredictable. You try to walk steady, shoulders hunched, but every gust feels personal. Once it even tears your hood back, and you swear you hear a sound almost like laughter. You know it's absurd, but still, you pull your candle from your pocket and light it again. The tiny flame wavers, then steadies, a gold defiance against the blue cold. There's an old pilgrim trick you've read about. When you're lost in a snowstorm, light a candle close to your face, not for visibility, but to judge the wind's direction. The way the flame bends tells you where shelter might be. It's half superstition, half science, and fully desperate. You try it now, and sure enough, the flame leans slightly west. You start walking that way, trusting a flicker more than your own sense of direction. As you go, the wind becomes less constant, but more mischievous. It waits until you relax, then pounces, slapping your face with freezing air, tugging at your cloak like a child demanding attention. You remember a story told by a 14th century friar who claimed that the devil himself traveled through mountain passes disguised as wind, extinguishing the lanterns of the faithful to see who would panic first. The friar wrote, "Those who relit the flame were blessed, those who cursed the darkness were lost." You decide not to test which category you belong to, so you keep relighting your candle every time it dies. The result is comical. You hunched and muttering, fumbling with flint, while invisible air keeps score. If anyone could see you now, they'd assume holiness or madness, and perhaps there's not much difference between the two. Around midday, you find a ridge that opens onto a vast field of snow. It stretches to the horizon, a flat white expanse broken only by the occasional black spike of a distant pine. You stop there, shielding your candle from the gusts with both hands, and take a long, slow breath. The silence between winds is immense, so total it feels like pressure on your eardrums. It's then you notice something peculiar. Your candle, though small, seems to hum faintly when the wind is absent, as if the flame itself vibrates in anticipation. A scholar centuries later might explain this as the low resonance of burning tallow, reacting to temperature shifts, but in the moment it feels supernatural. You imagine the monks who first noticed this hum, and mistook it for the candle's prayer. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong. The cold deepens as clouds begin to roll in, swallowing the pale sun. You press onward, each step sinking into snow that crunches like shattered glass. Your legs ache, but rhythm keeps you sane. Step, breathe, step, relight. At some point, the wind shifts so suddenly that it steals your candle entirely, snuffing it out mid-step and tossing it into the snow. You curse softly, then laugh at yourself. Congratulations, you've just been outwitted by air. You kneel, digging for the candle with numb fingers, and find it half buried, wax chipped but intact. You light it again, muttering a brief thank you to whatever force allowed it to survive. The flame sputters, catches, and steadies once more. It's ridiculous, but you feel lighter. In a world ruled by cold indifference, even a small victory against the wind feels like grace. There's a curious historical fact that comes to mind as you walk. Pilgrims sometimes carried candles not for light but as timekeepers. They marked each hour of walking by how far the wax melted. A kind of medieval Fitbit powered by fire. A full stick might last the distance between two villages. A short taper meant a shorter stretch before rest. You look down at yours, melting unevenly in the wind, and imagine it counting your endurance one drop at a time. Maybe that's what time really is, just wax slowly surrendering to heat. As dusk approaches, you come across a small chapel ruin carved into a cliffside, its doorway blocked by snow. You dig through it, curious, and squeeze inside. The air is still here, almost sacred in its quiet. The walls are covered in faint frescoes, saints holding lamps, monks shielding candles from ghostly blue gusts. You recognize one figure instantly, a haloed man standing before a swirling wind, his candle burning steady while all others go dark. A faded inscription beneath him reads, "Faith burns against the devil's breath." You stare at it, feeling an unexpected lump in your throat. Maybe the ancients weren't dramatizing weather after all. They were just trying to describe resistance. You set your candle on a stone ledge and watch the flame steady itself. Its light spills across the frost-coated icons, turning them briefly alive again, faces glowing, halos shimmering, frozen stories reignited for a moment. The flame wavers but holds. You sit there for a long time, breathing in rhythm with it. It's strange how something so fragile can feel so eternal. Outside, the wind roars again, battering the chapel walls, shaking snow from the roof. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the draft claw at your ankles, but inside, the candle still burns. You stare at it until your eyes blur, until the flicker seems to move like a living creature. You start to understand why pilgrims saw candles as companions. They were warmth, presence, witness. In a world where no one might ever hear your prayers, a small flame could at least see them. When the storm finally dies down, you step back into the night. The air is clearer now, and the moon, pale, enormous, hangs over the mountains like a silver coin. You hold the candle out once more, its light tiny but fierce, and the wind, almost politely, lets it live. You take a long breath, the kind that fills your lungs with frost and resolve, and start walking again. The flame flickers in rhythm with your steps, its reflection trembling in the sheen of the snow. You realize you've turned superstition into navigation, fear into ritual. And somewhere, far behind you, the ruined chapel glows faintly for a few minutes longer, a small ember in a landscape of endless white. The devil's wind passes through once more, but this time it doesn't bother you. It howls and moves on, searching for another light to chase. You keep walking, candle raised, leaving behind a faint trail of melted snow, and something almost like faith by morning. The soles of your feet feel like relics, hard, brittle, no longer certain where skin ends and wood begins. You pull off one sandal to inspect the damage, and the sight isn't pretty. The toes have gone pale, almost marble-colored, and when you press one it doesn't press back. The wind takes this moment to remind you that yes, it's still in charge, whistling through the ravine like a church organ tuned to cruelty. You slide the sandal back on, partly to protect your foot, partly to avoid seeing what faith looks like when it starts to rot. Medieval pilgrims would have called this stage the blessing of pain, because of course they did. Suffering was proof of sincerity, a spiritual receipt you could show at heaven's gate. Somewhere in an illuminated manuscript there's a drawing of Saint Roche, lifting his foot to reveal a boil the size of divine intervention. You think about that image, and try to laugh, but it comes out more like a cough. You start walking again, because walking is the only cure that works for everything in the mountains: cold, fear, boredom, doubt. The snow squeaks beneath you, each step a frozen confession. You remember reading that medieval chroniclers often compared long pilgrimages to walking sermons, where the body was the text and every blister a word of devotion. By that logic, your feet are practically illuminated manuscripts by now. Somewhere under the pain, a grim pride bubbles up. If holiness were measured by discomfort, you'd have your own feast day by Thursday. The wind, perhaps sensing your arrogance, immediately dumps a handful of snow down your collar as correction. As you trudge forward, you find yourself thinking of the so-called frostbite saints, those medieval figures who endured unimaginable winters and somehow turned suffering into legend. There was Saint Erasmus, who supposedly walked barefoot through the Alps to prove his faith, leaving bloody footprints that never froze. Another, Saint Gudule, carried candles through snowstorms so fierce that demons kept blowing them out until an angel shielded the flame with invisible hands. You imagine these stories being told by firesides, exaggerated with every retelling, each one comforting the next generation of travelers who had to face the same indifferent weather. You also imagine the less glamorous truth: half of those miraculous survivals were probably luck, stubbornness, and a misplaced sense of divine customer service. Still, you admire them. You always admired people who looked at a snowstorm and thought, yes, this is the perfect time for spiritual growth. You shuffle onward, each step a dialogue between belief and biology. The wind gnaws at your ears, and your nose drips icicles. You adjust your scarf and mutter to yourself, half in prayer, half in sarcasm. If any saint is listening, it's probably the patron of fools. By midday, your feet have stopped complaining. They've gone on strike entirely. Numbness replaces pain, which is either mercy or warning. You're not sure which. You pause by a frozen stream to rest, dipping your hand into the snow and pressing it to your ankle, because paradoxically, adding cold sometimes wakes the nerves. A memory surfaces, a 15th century traveler's account, describing a monk who treated frostbite by burying his legs in ashes, claiming that holy fire drives out the devil of frost. Historians later discovered he'd accidentally invented a crude form of insulation. You smile at that divine ignorance, practical results. It's a pattern that runs deep through the Middle Ages. As you sit there, you take stock of what still feels alive, fingers tingling, nose half frozen, half present, heart loud, steady, a bit annoyed. You flex your feet, wincing at the cracks forming where skin meets leather. It's strange how quickly the human body becomes both enemy and companion out here. You whisper a line you once read in a monk's marginal note: "The flesh obeys only when it fears the soul." You wonder if that's true, or just something written by a man who never had to climb a mountain in winter. You resume walking, slower now, counting your steps in sets of 10, because arithmetic distracts you from agony. Every so often, you stop to tap your toes, checking for sensation. Sometimes you think you feel something, but it might just be hope pretending to be blood flow. The landscape around you has changed again, less forgiving, more vertical. The sky presses close, gray and heavy. You pass a group of rocks arranged in what looks like a crude cross. Someone, maybe a pilgrim, maybe a herdsman, built it here long ago. Tied to it with frozen twine is a small leather pouch. You open it carefully and find inside a few blackened herbs and what might once have been a toe. You close it quickly, deciding that's one relic you don't need to venerate. The sun finally breaks through the cloud cover in thin, watery rays, and for a brief moment you feel warmth. You stop, close your eyes, and turn your face toward it like a sunflower desperate for theology. You remember another story, Saint Hedwig of Silesia, who gave away her shoes every winter as penance and insisted that her feet never felt pain because God's grace walked before her. Scholars still argue about whether that meant she was miraculously frostproof or just had very poor nerve endings. Either way, it's an oddly comforting thought that somewhere in the tangle between faith and circulation, someone found a way to call suffering holy. You press on. The snow has softened slightly under the weak sunlight, which makes the walking both easier and wetter. The cold seeps up through your soles, soaking into your socks. You remember a line from a medieval guidebook for pilgrims: "When your feet ache, praise them, for they carry you to God." You try to whisper something resembling gratitude, though it comes out closer to a complaint. Gratitude, after all, is warmer in theory than in practice. Later, you reach a small plateau, where an abandoned stone hut leans precariously against a slope. Inside, you find what looks like a shrine made of old boot soles, hundreds of them nailed to the wall like strange dark flowers. Someone, perhaps centuries ago, must have started this ritual, leaving behind the sandals of the faithful as offerings. You touch one, smooth, brittle, rimed with frost, and realize how human this all is. The need to mark endurance, to turn pain into symbol. A quirky tidbit from a 14th century traveler's diary comes to mind. Pilgrims crossing the Great St. Bernard Pass sometimes threw their worn shoes into ravines to lighten the soul and the luggage alike. It's easy to mock until you feel your own soles peeling away, and suddenly symbolism sounds efficient. As evening approaches, the temperature plummets again. You light your candle, more out of habit than need, and watch its trembling reflection in the frost that coats the hut's walls. The air inside smells faintly of wax and decay, like old chapels left to themselves. You sit on a rock, unwrap your feet, and inspect the damage again. This time, you can't avoid it. 2 toes have turned a dull gray, and the skin looks waxy. You know enough to recognize the beginning of frostbite, though a medieval pilgrim might have called it the mark of endurance. You whisper to yourself that it's fine, that you'll be fine, that tomorrow will be warmer. It's a lie, but a gentle one, the kind that helps you sleep. You rewrap your feet, blow out the candle, and lie down on the frozen floor. The last thing you see before your eyes close is the faint silhouette of all those shoes nailed to the wall, glowing faintly in the moonlight. They look like wings, hundreds of them, ready to carry the faithful somewhere beyond the cold. You think about the saints who supposedly walked barefoot through snow, the monks who buried their frostbitten legs in ashes, and the anonymous travelers who turned their pain into monuments. Maybe holiness was never about endurance at all. Maybe it was just about leaving proof that you kept walking. The wind outside sighs, soft but endless, weaving through cracks in the stone. You pull your cloak tighter, press your heels together for the illusion of warmth, and whisper a sleepy benediction to your own blistered feet. Good work, you murmur to nobody in particular. You've earned sainthood. Then you drift into a shallow, restless sleep, while the frost settles quietly over everything. Your breath, your shoes, your faith, like a cold blessing from the indifferent sky. When you wake, the world has vanished. The air is no longer air. It's a wall, a pale gray curtain pressed against your face. The mountains you fell asleep beside have been swallowed whole by mist, leaving only the sound of your own breathing and the slow drip of melting frost from the hut's roof. You blink, but the fog doesn't lift. It thickens, wrapping itself around you like wet wool. Somewhere above, the sun is trying to rise, but all it manages is a faint, directionless glow, the color of old pewter. This is what pilgrims called God's breath made heavy, the kind of fog that feels sentient, watching, waiting for you to make a mistake. You step outside anyway, because standing still feels worse than being lost. Your first step disappears into white. Your second vanishes too. Soon, even your footprints fade, filled in by moisture as quickly as you make them. The silence is enormous, a kind of physical pressure that fills your ears until your heartbeat becomes the only sound left. You wave a hand in front of your face and see barely your own fingers. Somewhere, faint and far off, a bell tolls once deep, distorted, as if underwater. You turn toward it instinctively, though direction has stopped meaning anything. In medieval travel manuals, half guidebook, half sermon, pilgrims were told to trust the bell in the fog, for it speaks when eyes fail. You decide to follow that ancient advice, mostly because you don't have a better plan. You walk slowly, testing each step before committing your weight. The snow beneath has turned soft and deceptive, a slush of half-frozen mud and ice. Your feet sink, squelch, lift again. Every few paces you pause, straining to hear the bell. Sometimes it sounds closer, sometimes it's gone entirely, replaced by the low hiss of wind moving through unseen valleys. It's in those moments that unease begins to creep in, the subtle awareness that fog does strange things to distance, to sound, even to thought. Medieval pilgrims wrote of the veil of testing, a mist that disoriented both body and spirit, making sinners confess to rocks and greet ghosts as fellow travelers. You smile uneasily at the memory, half expecting to bump into some remorseful phantom eager for company. An hour passes, maybe more. It's impossible to tell. You keep walking, and the fog keeps breathing around you. Shapes begin to appear. Faint outlines of trees, hunched and glistening with frost, their branches heavy with invisible snow. You brush against one, and it sheds a shower of ice crystals that sparkle briefly before dissolving into mist. The bell tolls again, louder now but still not near. You follow, drawn like a moth toward sound. Somewhere deep inside, you feel the creeping suspicion that the bell may not exist at all. Some chroniclers mentioned a phenomenon called echo saints, phantom sounds that mimicked church bells and led pilgrims astray. One even claimed these were the voices of lost travelers still walking centuries later. The church dismissed it as superstition, but then again, the church wasn't in this fog. Eventually, your hand collides with something solid. Rough stone, wet and cold. You trace it upward, until you find the curve of an archway, then the hollow of a doorway. You've stumbled upon a structure, a chapel, maybe, or a way station for travelers. You duck inside, grateful for the sense of boundaries, even if they're invisible in the haze. Inside, the air is thick with dampness and the faint smell of old wax. You strike a spark and light your candle, and instantly the world shrinks to a small circle of gold. The flame trembles violently in the draught, threatening to vanish, but it holds. The light reveals rough-hewn walls coated in condensation, and along one wall a rope frayed, but still intact, stretches into the mist beyond the doorway. You tug it gently and it moves, disappearing into the distance. Then you remember monks once hung ropes across mountain valleys during winter to guide lost travelers. They called them threads of salvation. You grip the rope and step back outside, holding it tight as you move forward into the whiteness. It's slick with frost, but solid, reassuring. You can't see where it leads, but at least it leads somewhere. As you walk, your candlelight flickers off the moisture in the air, creating the illusion of tiny stars swirling around you. It feels almost holy, this slow procession through fog and silence. You imagine medieval pilgrims doing the same, one hand on the rope, one hand clutching their faith like a weapon against disorientation. The rope guides you downward, then sharply left, then up again, tracing invisible turns that must follow the valley's edge. Occasionally you find knots tied along its length. Markers, maybe prayers. One is wrapped with a strip of cloth stiffened by ice. You touch it gently and whisper a silent thanks to whoever left it. Another knot has something carved into the rope's anchor post, a single Latin word, resisti. Resist. It's a simple message, and it makes you laugh softly, though the sound instantly dies in the damp. Resist what? The cold, the fog, the temptation to sit down and give up? Probably all three. After what feels like hours, you sense a change in the air. The fog thins slightly, just enough for shapes to start existing again. Trees, boulders, the vague suggestion of a path. You let go of the rope but keep glancing back at it like a lifeline you've just untied yourself from. Ahead, a slope descends into what looks like a clearing, and you follow it carefully, your boots slipping on the wet ground. The bell sounds once more, close this time, and you finally see it, a small wooden tower, leaning precariously over the valley, its rope swaying from a beam, the bell itself half covered in rime. You reach it, pull the rope once, and the sound that answers is low and mournful, vibrating through your chest. It's less a call to prayer, and more a reminder that someone somewhere once cared enough to build this. You rest beneath the tower, light another candle, and set it on the snow beside you. The flame's reflection wavers in the sheen of ice, turning the ground into liquid gold. You think of all the pilgrims who must have done this exact thing, sat in fog, clutching ropes, praying to bells. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. In 1223, the monks of the Great St. Bernard Pass recorded saving 402 souls from the mists, though historians suspect the number was exaggerated for donations. Still, the detail is comforting. It means that even in centuries of blindness, someone kept a light burning. As you sit there, the fog begins to lift. Slowly, reluctantly, it unravels, revealing hints of sky, first gray, then faint blue. The mountains return, enormous and indifferent. You stand, stretching numb limbs, and look back toward the path you came from. There's no sign of the chapel, no sign of the rope, not even footprints. The fog has erased everything except memory. You take one last look at the bell, touch its frozen rim, and whisper, "Resist," then you turn away. When you start walking again, the air feels lighter, your lungs freer. The mist clings only to the valleys now, moving like smoke between peaks. You realize you've spent an entire day walking through blindness, and somehow ended up more certain of direction than before. Maybe that's what the monks meant when they said fog purified the soul. It forces you to trust the unseen. You walk until the sky deepens into evening, and the first stars appear. You make camp in the open this time. No hut, no roof, just a patch of snow that doesn't look too judgmental. You light one last candle, set it beside you, and watch the fog retreat down the mountains like a tide going out. For the first time in days you can see the horizon clearly. It's strange, almost unsettling, how exposed it feels. You pull your cloak around you and whisper into the wind, half prayer, half observation. The world's still here, and somewhere below, the bell tolls one final time, low and distant, echoing through valleys like the earth itself exhaling. You close your eyes, listening, until even that fades. Then the night settles, cold, vast, and clear, and you drift into uneasy sleep, still breathing in rhythm with the mountains, still carrying the faint scent of fog in your hair. Night comes slowly on the mountains, as if the sky itself hesitates to admit that it's run out of light. The air cools first, slipping around your neck like cold silk, then thickens until even the sound of your movements feels muffled. You build a small hollow in the snow, the way you've seen shepherds do, and line it with pine branches scavenged from a fallen tree. The scent is sharp and clean, a brief memory of life in a landscape that mostly smells like nothing at all. When you finally settle into your cocoon, the world above is a silver bowl, and the moon, perfectly round, stares down like an unblinking eye. They called it the relic moon in the old chronicles, a holy witness to the desperate and the devout. It wasn't just poetic flourish. Many pilgrims actually carried shards of glass or polished metal to catch its reflection, believing the trapped light could protect them from frost or demons. You never bothered with such things, but tonight, under that glacial stare, you start to wish you had. The snow around you glows faintly in the moonlight, every crystal a mirror for something ancient. You can see your breath rising toward it, curling and twisting before vanishing into the haloed dark. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once, long and low. The sound echoes down the slopes like a voice warning you that sleep out here is a gamble. You listen anyway, because silence in the mountains is never total. It always carries a heartbeat or two beneath it. You pull your cloak tighter, feel your pulse in your fingertips, and remind yourself of what a Benedictine chronicler once wrote about these nights. He who sleeps beneath the relic moon dreams the truth of his soul. You're not sure whether that was meant as comfort or threat, but you suspect both were accurate. As the first edge of drowsiness creeps in, you begin to notice details that daylight hides. The faint shimmer of frost tracing your breath, the thin red thread of veins on your hands glowing like tiny rivers beneath translucent skin, the slow rhythmic creak of ice shifting somewhere deep under the snow. You breathe with it, matching its pulse, and in that moment the whole mountain seems alive. The cold isn't your enemy anymore. It's your teacher, your disciplinarian, your unwanted companion. The monks used to say that sleeping in the open during pilgrimage was a vow of humility before creation. You wonder if humility always has to hurt this much. You try to rest, but sleep keeps its distance. The moon is too bright, the kind of light that reveals instead of comforts. You roll onto your side, and the frost clings to your cloak like powdered glass. To distract yourself, you think of the relics pilgrims once carried on these same roads. Splinters of saints' bones, bits of cloth said to have touched the Virgin's veil, sometimes just dirt from a holy place wrapped in linen. One mainstream historical fact you remember: merchants in 13th century France sold anti-frost relics, small bone fragments supposedly from Saint Bernard himself, guaranteed to keep travelers warm if kissed before bed. Most of them were, of course, chicken bones. You grin at the thought, the absurdity of it somehow comforting. Humanity has always tried to outsmart the cold with a mix of faith and fraud, but the idea of relics lingers with you. You glance at your candle stub beside the nest of pine branches. It's burned down to almost nothing, the last of its wax pooled around the wick like frozen honey. You light it anyway, and its tiny flame flutters in the moonlight, pale gold against the silver glow. The sight of it stirs something you can't quite name, a fragile defiance maybe, or simply habit. You find yourself whispering a fragment of an old prayer you half remember from childhood, something about warmth and mercy and mourning. The words fog in front of you, visible for an instant before dissolving. You think of all the thousands who must have whispered similar words on similar nights, asking the sky for the same small favor: let me see another sunrise. At some point, the air begins to move again. A soft wind slides over the ridge, carrying with it a faint smell of resin and smoke. You sit up, alert. Somewhere out there, someone else has a fire. The thought sends a thrill through you. Company. Proof that you're not the last fool left on this mountain. You stand, stretch your aching legs, and begin walking toward the scent, following instinct rather than logic. The moonlight makes every slope look the same, but you trust your nose and your luck. After a while, you find a small hollow between boulders where the snow has melted in a neat circle, the ground dark and wet. The fire's long gone, but the stones are still warm to the touch. You kneel beside them, pressing your palms flat against the lingering heat, and imagine the travelers who sat here hours or days before. Maybe they were praying, maybe just thawing their toes, maybe both. You take one of the stones, a small flat one, smooth as a relic, and slip it into your pocket. It's still faintly warm, and you decide to keep it as a charm. A quirky tidbit drifts back from your reading. Some pilgrims believed that stones which had seen fire held a fragment of divine endurance. The idea was that heat left behind a memory the rock could share with the next soul in need. Ridiculous, maybe, but as the stone radiates against your leg, you decide that even superstition is better than frostbite. You return to your nest beneath the open sky, lay the stone beside your candle, and finally allow yourself to lie still. The moon seems larger now, closer, as though it's leaning in to listen. Its light spills over you, filling every hollow, every fold of your cloak. You can almost feel it press against your eyelids. The chroniclers said the relic moon stole warmth from sleepers, trading it for visions. You wonder what it will take from you. Sleep finally comes, slow and slippery, pulling you down like a tide. You drift through fragments of dreams, snow turning to feathers, frozen rivers humming like harp strings, faceless monks whispering in a language made of breath. Somewhere in that half-dream, you sense the moon watching, reflecting you back to yourself. It feels like confession. It feels like being seen. When you wake again, dawn is already bleeding into the east, faint pink lines slicing through the silver night. The moon is fading, sinking behind a ridge, but it leaves behind its afterimage, a pale circle hovering in the sky, like a ghost reluctant to depart. You reach for the warm stone, and find it still holding a trace of heat. Impossibly, you smile and whisper, "Thank you," to no one in particular. Maybe the monks were right after all. Maybe warmth really is just memory refusing to die. You stand, brush the frost from your cloak, and face the sunrise. The relic moon's work is done, but its calm lingers inside you. The cold still bites, but it no longer feels like punishment. It feels like conversation. The wind greets you softly, carrying the faint scent of pine. You take one last look at your little nest, at the hollow your body left in the snow, and then you walk on, your shadow long and silver behind you, carrying your relic, your breath and the quiet lesson of the night. Even the coldest light can keep you alive if you learn how to listen to it. The silence that follows the relic moon feels heavier than the cold. It presses against your ribs with a quiet that's almost physical, the kind of stillness that makes you hear your own pulse echoing in your ears. You walk through the morning fog, the snow beneath your boots whispering like parchment. The sky is colorless, the kind of gray that feels stretched too thin to ever turn blue again. Your breath leaves pale ghosts behind you, but even those fade too quickly, swallowed by a wind that smells faintly of pine, ash, and something animal. It's not until the third time you stop to listen that you notice the sound. Low, distant, rhythmic. A howl, not long or mournful like stories claim, but short, clipped, almost conversational, as if the mountain itself just remembered how to speak. You've read the medieval bestiaries. You know what they said about wolves. They were the devil's dogs, the shepherd's nightmare, omens of greed and hunger made flesh. Yet, in another manuscript, one written by an anonymous Carthusian monk, they were also described as creatures that remind men of God's patience, for they only eat what they must. The contradiction feels perfectly human. You pause, listening again, and the sound comes closer, joined by another, higher-pitched cry that trembles through the air like a thread of silver. You can't tell how many there are, only that they're moving. You shift the strap of your pack higher on your shoulder and keep walking, trying to pretend you don't feel watched. The day grows colder as clouds roll in, thick and low. You haven't eaten since the pine needle tea 2 nights ago, and the ache in your stomach has settled into something deeper, an emptiness that feels both physical and spiritual. The snow crunches rhythmically beneath your feet, a reminder that you're still moving, still alive, still doing the one thing your ancestors believed counted as prayer. A mainstream historical fact you recall drifts up like an uninvited thought. Some medieval pilgrims deliberately fasted during winter journeys, believing that hunger purified their souls and brought them closer to the divine. Others didn't have a choice. You wonder which one you are. A shadow crosses your path, fast, fleeting, gone. Then another. You turn sharply, heart stuttering, but there's nothing, just snow, trees, and a silence so taut you could pluck it like a string. You exhale slowly, letting the mist from your breath drift toward the tree line. That's when you see it, movement, low to the ground, the glint of 2 eyes that reflect just enough light to prove they're real. Then another pair, and another. The wolves are there after all, not imagined but patient, padding through the snow with that effortless quiet that makes you feel like an intruder in your own world. They don't approach, not yet. They simply match your pace, distant silhouettes in the fog, following like shadows with teeth. You remember one of the more bizarre entries in a 14th century Pilgrim's journal. A man claimed he was protected from wolves by singing hymns off-key, because the beasts detest false harmony. You're not convinced of the science, but desperate times invite experimental theology, so you hum. The sound comes out cracked, awkward, tuneless, but it fills the air and keeps your breath moving. The wolves pause, their heads cocking almost comically, as though confused by this strange two-legged creature trying to invent music. The moment passes, and they drift back into the mist. You grin despite yourself. If nothing else, you've given the local fauna something to gossip about. Hunger gnaws harder now, turning your humor brittle. You stop beside a frozen stream, kneel and dig through the crust of ice until you find a trickle of water running underneath. You cup your hands and drink, the cold biting your lips. Then you take a handful of snow and press it to your tongue, letting it melt slowly, pretending it's something more nourishing. It's not enough, but it's ritual. Every pilgrim had one, a routine, a rhythm, a reason to keep from despair. One quirky tidbit from an abbey chronicle comes to mind. Hungry travelers were told to chew on bits of leather or bark, not for food, but to remind the teeth of purpose. You laugh quietly, imagining a procession of devout believers gnawing on their own belts. Then you glance down at your own boots and wonder, briefly, how bad they'd taste roasted. By midday, the clouds have lowered until they're practically sitting on the mountains. The wolves have disappeared. Or maybe they've just become part of the fog. You keep walking until you reach a small clearing where a cluster of stones forms a rough circle. A fire pit, maybe, or an altar. There's no sign of recent use, only ashes buried under a crust of snow. You kneel, brush them clear, and find something buried within, a single iron hook, blackened, half bent. It's the kind used to hang pots over flames. You pocket it without thinking. In a world where warmth is a rumor, even a scrap of iron feels like a relic. The light fades early. You decide to make camp beneath a leaning pine that groans under the weight of snow. You gather what dry wood you can, strike your flint, and coax a reluctant flame into existence. It burns small but steady, painting your hands in gold and shadow. You set the iron hook above it just for the symbolism, hang your pot, and fill it with snow. The hiss of melting ice is the sweetest sound you've heard all day. You stir it with a twig, pretending it's broth, and the smell of burning resin almost convinces your stomach you're about to eat. Almost. As you sit there staring into the fire, you notice shapes moving again at the edge of the clearing, silent, deliberate. The wolves have returned, half a dozen at least, their fur catching the faint light in silvery flashes. They circle slowly, keeping distance, eyes bright as coins. You freeze, instinctively gripping the handle of your walking staff, though it's a laughable defense. The lead wolf stops and stares at you. Its breath rises in thick white plumes, mirroring yours. For a moment, you sit together, two creatures simply trying to stay warm. You remember another medieval belief, that wolves were drawn not to fear, but to sin. If you were impure of heart, they would smell it on you. You exhale and whisper softly, "Good news, friend. I've confessed everything to the cold already." The wolf tilts its head, then turns away, padding silently back into the dark. The others follow, melting into the snow like shadows returning home. The clearing grows quiet again, save for the hiss of your tiny fire and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. You realize your fear has burned away, leaving behind something smaller but sturdier, acceptance, maybe. The wolves aren't evil, just hungry, same as you. You both roam the same frozen church, praying in different languages. You fall asleep sitting up, hands cupped around the pot, eyes half open to the embers. When you dream, it's not of warmth or food, but of footsteps, yours, the wolves, the countless others who walked these same passes long before you, each leaving nothing but breath and bone and faith behind. Somewhere in that dream, the wind speaks, low and steady, keep walking. When you wake again, the fire has died to coals, and the world is covered in new snow. The clearing looks untouched, as if you were never there. You rise stiffly, brush frost from your cloak, and glance toward the tree line. No sign of wolves, no tracks but your own. You take the iron hook from your pack, still warm from its proximity to the fire, and hang it on a low branch before leaving, a gift for the next traveler. A small act of gratitude disguised as faith. As you climb back to the path, dawn breaks weakly through the fog, painting the snow in faint gold. Your stomach growls, your body aches, but your mind feels strangely calm. Hunger no longer feels like suffering, it feels like clarity. You realize that in the end, the wolves taught you something that saints never could. Survival isn't a miracle, it's an understanding. The world gives nothing freely, but it gives just enough. You breathe in, slow and deep, tasting pine and ash, and the faint sweetness of morning. Then you keep walking, your shadow long behind you, your stomach empty but your spirit strangely full. By the time the path narrows again into a frozen corridor between boulders, you've learned to stop expecting comfort from anything solid. Stone cracks, ice shifts, wind lies. You've begun to trust only mud, the rare, strange patches of half-thawed earth that appear in unexpected places like small brown miracles. The first one you see today is steaming faintly, a warm blemish in a world of white. You kneel beside it, astonished, and touch it with your fingertips. It's real, damp, pliable, alive. You smear some between your palms and the sensation nearly makes you laugh. Warmth from dirt, humility in its purest form. Medieval travelers swore that mud was protective, that coating your legs in it before crossing frozen ground insulated you from both frost and evil. They called it God's armor for the poor. The monks might have been exaggerating, but right now, kneeling in the snow with your hands caked in brown, you're willing to test their theology. You roll up your cloak and scoop up handfuls of mud, spreading it along your calves, your knees, even your boots. It's a ridiculous ritual, but the texture feels alive, the weight grounding you in ways faith never quite managed. The smell, earthy, mineral, faintly rotten, is strangely comforting, like the memory of rain in a place that hasn't seen rain in months. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind. In the Alps, shepherds once coated their sheep's hooves with clay before driving them through frost, believing it preserved warmth better than fat or wool. Scientists centuries later confirmed that the clay did, in fact, act as insulation. You grin. The line between superstition and science has always been as thin as ice. When you stand again, the mud has stiffened into a dull crust. You test a few steps and discover it really does help. The cold no longer gnaws directly through your skin. It just taps politely from outside. You walk faster, emboldened, half man and half statue, crunching through snow that sounds like brittle parchment. The sky above glows faintly gold, but it's the kind of gold that never warms anything, it just watches. You think about all the pilgrims who trudged this same path, caked in the same dirt, muttering the same prayers for survival. Maybe they weren't asking for salvation so much as solidarity, from the ground, from each other, from the mud itself. As the day deepens, you come across a half-collapsed stone shelter, tucked into a hillside. Its entrance is rimmed with icicles that look like teeth. You duck inside and find a floor covered in old ashes and more of that miraculous mud. Half frozen, but still pliable. The walls bear strange markings, spirals, crosses, handprints, Pilgrims graffiti. You guess, a record of those who needed to be seen by time, even if only faintly. You kneel to trace one of the prints and realize it's smaller than your own, maybe a child's. There were families on these roads once, entire generations walking toward shrines that promised warmth on the other side. You imagine them stopping here, coating each other's faces with mud to block the wind, laughing through chattering teeth. The image almost breaks you. You light your candle again, and set it in a crack between two stones. The flame throws long shadows that dance across the wall, making the old handprints flicker as though waving. The air smells of minerals and smoke. You dip your fingers into the mud again and smear a stripe across your forehead, partly as tribute, partly as a joke. The sensation is shockingly cold but strangely calming. Maybe that's what they meant by purification, not the cleansing of the body, but the surrender to the earth that birthed it. A quirky tidbit resurfaces from some dusty manuscript. You think it was a French one that described a brotherhood of mud, peasants who anointed themselves before long winter journeys and believed that God walked most closely with the dirty. You smile, feeling like an honorary member. When you leave the shelter, twilight has arrived in shades of violet and steel. The snow gleams faintly under the fading light, and your muddy armor has hardened into something like clay plates. Every step cracks faintly, like pottery being tested for flaws. You start to wonder how long it will last before turning brittle and useless. A thought you'd rather not entertain follows right behind it. Maybe humans aren't so different, strong until dry, protective until fragile, holy only when caked in the mess they came from. You push the thought aside and focus on walking. The path turns downward, hugging the curve of a frozen stream. Patches of dark earth appear more frequently now, each one steaming faintly as if breathing. There must be heat beneath the surface, a hidden spring or vein of warmth. The idea thrills you. You kneel by one and dig through the snow until your fingers strike soft, damp soil. It's almost hot to the touch. You pull your hands back, startled, then grin. Here, beneath a world of ice, the planet is still awake. You remember how medieval mystics described the earth as a living body, the surface as skin, rivers as veins, volcanoes as its breath. To walk upon it, one wrote, is to walk upon something dreaming. You dig deeper, just to feel that dream pulsing under your fingertips. You smear the fresh mud onto your arms this time, whispering a half-serious blessing over yourself. You can't help laughing at the absurdity, a frozen pilgrim baptizing himself in dirt. But it feels right. The cold bites less fiercely now. Whether it's real or imagined doesn't matter. Faith and mud seem equally effective. You take a deep breath and exhale a cloud of steam that looks for an instant like incense rising from an altar. The altar, you realize, is everywhere. The ground, the air, your skin. As night falls, the wind returns. It howls across the valley, lifting loose snow into swirling veils that glimmer like smoke. You find another hollow between rocks and crouch there, pressing your mud-stiffened arms around your knees. The crust cracks slightly with every movement, releasing a faint, earthy scent. It's ridiculous, but it feels like protection, like the mountain itself lent you its skin. You think about those medieval pilgrims again, the ones who turned soil into salvation, and realize they weren't worshipping mud at all. They were worshipping endurance, the way life refuses to stay clean when the world turns cruel. You light your candle one last time for the night, the tiny flame trembling against the wind that seeps through the stones. In its glow, your hands look ancient, sculpted, almost fossilized. The wax drips onto your fingers, mixing with dirt, sealing everything together in a strange, fragile harmony. You whisper a line you once read in a forgotten travel journal. God made man from dust, not as punishment, but as permission to keep falling and still be his. You don't remember who wrote it, but it feels true. Outside, the stars appear one by one, their light sharp enough to cut through frost. You blow out your candle and lie back, feeling the mud cool against your skin, hearing the mountain breathe beneath you. For once, the cold doesn't feel cruel. It feels honest. You close your eyes, letting the earth cradle you, and think that maybe this is what miracles really are. Not burning bushes or splitting seas, but small pockets of warmth in the places you least deserve them. You fall asleep like that. Half clay, half prayer. And when the wind sweeps over you, it doesn't sting anymore. It just brushes by. Respectful, as if recognizing one of its own. By morning, The wind has dropped to a whisper, and everything around you has turned to glass. The world looks like it has been blown from crystal, every branch coated in ice so delicate that it rings faintly when the air moves. You stand, stretch the stiffness from your joints, and the crust of dried mud on your clothes cracks like old pottery. When you brush at it, flakes fall away, leaving behind streaks of warmth on your skin where your body heat still clings. You take that as a small victory, proof that you're still here, still made of something that remembers motion. The sky above is a blank gray sheet, sunless and without horizon, so that walking feels like moving through the inside of a pearl. Your breath curls upward, leaving a trail behind you like incense smoke rising from a censer. Somewhere below the slope you see the glint of a river, wide and unmoving. It's easy to forget that rivers don't disappear in winter. They simply change verbs. The stream you reach has become a solid mirror, its surface veined with cracks that look like veins beneath pale skin. When you step onto it, the sound is almost musical, a low humming note that vibrates through your boots and into your bones. Every movement sends ripples of dull blue light racing beneath the ice, as though the river is sighing in its sleep. You pause, testing each step, remembering the warnings from old pilgrimage guides: never trust the frozen waters, for beneath them hides temptation, deep and cold. You always assumed that was metaphor, the kind preachers use to spice up a sermon. But as you take another cautious step, you realize the metaphor had a very practical point. The surface holds barely. Beneath the translucent crust, you can see the slow, dark movement of water still alive, still resisting. The sound it makes is a whisper, continuous and strangely human, like the murmur of a congregation reciting a prayer. You crouch and touch the ice, pressing your palm flat. It burns instantly, the kind of cold that bypasses pain and moves straight into memory. You remember stories told by monks about rivers that froze so cleanly you could see fish swimming beneath the ice, trapped mid-motion like souls awaiting resurrection. One mainstream historical account from the 12th century even describes a priest who delivered a sermon on a frozen river, standing before a crowd of pilgrims while the current thundered silently below his feet. He called it a lesson in balance and faith. It ended well enough until the last hymn, when the ice cracked like thunder, and half the congregation found themselves baptized without consent. You take another step, testing your balance, trying not to think about that priest. The sound beneath your boots deepens, a long groan, a low note that vibrates up your spine. It feels like standing on a drum skin stretched across eternity. You start to move faster, half walking, half sliding, because hesitation seems to make the ice nervous. The cold air cuts through your clothes, but there's a strange exhilaration in this dangerous rhythm, as though each second survived is its own act of worship. You glance behind you and see your footprints, dark ovals of melt that refreeze almost instantly, sealing over your passage as if the river refuses to acknowledge you were ever there. Halfway across, you stop to rest and look around. The landscape is stripped bare. No trees, no birds. Just an expanse of white sky above, and frozen reflection below. For a dizzying moment, it's impossible to tell which side you're standing on. You imagine flipping upside down, walking along the underside of the ice while your reflection keeps trudging above, and you wonder which of you would pray harder. The absurd thought makes you laugh aloud, and the sound bounces strangely, ricocheting across the valley until it sounds like someone else is laughing back. You remember a line from a forgotten pilgrim's journal. On the ice every voice is doubled, so that man may hear himself as heaven hears him. You try it again. Speak softly, just a word or two, and sure enough, the echo comes back faint and delayed, higher, almost reverent. You keep walking, speaking fragments of half-remembered psalms and nonsense syllables, and the ice keeps answering, your private congregation of sound and frost. Then, as if tired of games, the ice cracks, not a catastrophic break, just a sharp, precise fracture beneath your left foot, followed by a delicate branching line that darts outward like lightning caught in slow motion. You freeze instantly, balancing on one foot, heart slamming against your ribs. The sound that follows is softer than you expect, almost apologetic, a sigh rather than a roar. You wait, counting breaths, until the silence returns. The crack stops spreading, the line closing faintly as cold air presses it shut. You take a step backward, then another, moving toward the thicker, more opaque part of the river near the bank. The adrenaline hits afterward, hot and dizzying. You laugh again, louder this time, wild and grateful, because the simple fact of not falling in feels like divine intervention. You make it to the opposite shore just as snow begins to fall again, fine and dry, swirling in horizontal gusts. You turn back to look at the river, now half hidden in mist. The surface seems smooth again, unbothered, the thin crack already sealed by the new frost. If you hadn't seen it yourself, you'd never know it happened. You think of that priest and his frozen congregation, and wonder whether faith really is just a matter of pretending the ice will hold until it does. Near the riverbank stands a single dead tree, its roots exposed where the ground has shifted. You sit beneath it, exhausted, and unwrap your pack. There's nothing inside worth eating, but you take out your warm stone, the one you carried from the relic moon's hollow, and press it against your chest. It's cooled since then, but still holds a memory of heat, faint and steady, like a pulse. You let it rest there while you catch your breath. The snow falls around you silently, coating your shoulders, your knees, your pack. You feel yourself sinking into stillness. It's easy to understand why medieval monks loved rivers. They were metaphors waiting to happen. Motion beneath stillness, faith beneath fear, life beneath ice. You imagine one of those monks writing by candlelight, describing you without knowing you, turning your frozen crossing into allegory. The pilgrim on the glass of faith walks not on water but on mercy, he'd write, then lean back, satisfied with himself. You grin at the thought and whisper, "Good line, brother. You can have that one." After a while, you notice something glinting near the base of the tree. A small metal object, half buried in the snow. You dig it out and find a tarnished pendant, a circle enclosing a tiny cross. The chain is long gone, but the metal is surprisingly warm to the touch. You turn it over and find an inscription scratched crudely into the back. For whoever survives. It's hard to tell whether it's a prayer or a warning. Either way, you hang it from the strap of your pack, the cold charm tapping softly against your shoulder as you stand and start walking again. The path beyond the river climbs sharply, winding between cliffs. The air grows thinner, drier, the wind sharper. You walk for hours, following faint traces of older footprints, some animal, some human, none recent. Each one looks frozen mid-story, interrupted sentences written in snow. The climb is steep enough that you stop counting steps and start measuring distance in breaths. Inhale, step, exhale, survive. It becomes a rhythm, almost musical, and soon you fall into a trance of movement. Your mind drifts, half listening to the wind, half inventing sermons you'll never give. You imagine yourself standing before a congregation of frostbitten pilgrims, holding up a lump of mud and declaring, "Behold, your miracle." They'd probably laugh, but that's fine. Laughter is holy too. As the afternoon fades into another gray dusk, you reach a plateau overlooking the river you crossed hours earlier. From here, it looks impossibly small, a silver thread winding through the valley. You can see where the ice fractured, the faint scar glimmering in the last of the light. It's strange how fear looks so delicate from a distance. You stand there for a long time, breathing in the frozen air, your heart finally steady. You realize that the crack didn't ruin the crossing. It made you pay attention. Maybe that's the sermon the river was trying to preach. Awareness through risk, faith through tension, grace through the sound of breaking. You build a small fire before night fully takes over. Feeding it with dry brush, you find wedged between rocks. The flames rise quickly, greedy for oxygen, and their light turns the snow pink. You hold your hands close, letting the heat bring back sensation to your fingertips. The pendant catches the firelight and glows faintly, the words for whoever survives now gleaming, as if freshly etched. You whisper them aloud once, twice, until they sound less like prophecy and more like promise. When the fire dies down, you lie beside it, staring at the sky. The stars are sharp tonight, brilliant against the black. You trace the constellations the way monks once did: Orion the hunter, Ursa Major the great bear, the crooked belt of Cassiopeia. The old texts said the heavens were a map for pilgrims, guiding them as surely as any path on earth. You watch your breath cloud upward toward those distant fires and think, maybe they were right. The stars don't move to save you, but they remind you there's more than cold. The wind shifts once more, bringing with it the faint rumble of the river below, still moving under its skin of ice. It sounds, for all the world, like a congregation singing somewhere deep beneath the surface. You listen until the rhythm of it matches your heartbeat, until you can almost make out words in the music of water and stone. Then you close your eyes, the pendant cool against your chest, the fire's last embers whispering at your side, and let the sermon continue without you. The river keeps preaching in its slow, frozen tongue, and the mountain listens, and you somewhere between both finally drift into sleep, carried by a silence that feels less like absence and more like peace. When morning comes, you wake to the sound of your own teeth clinking softly together, a rhythm more honest than any prayer bell. The ashes of last night's fire have turned white, a brittle skeleton of warmth that refuses to rise again no matter how much you stir it. You crouch there for a while, your breath visible, your fingers numb, and realize that even the best fires are temporary companions. The mountain always wins. You wrap your cloak tighter and start to walk before your body forgets what movement feels like. The air bites hard. Even the sound of your boots on snow seems sharper, as though noise itself has frozen into shards. But the world ahead glows faintly gold, a deceptive morning that looks warm but isn't. You move toward it anyway, a mile, maybe two, and your limbs begin to ache with that deep, hollow pain that feels older than muscle, something bone-deep, ancestral. You know this pain. So did every pilgrim who ever tried to cross a winter pass without enough fuel to burn. In the 13th century, a Franciscan chronicler named Pietro of Siena wrote about travelers who learned the science of warmth without flame. He described how monks sleeping in alpine monasteries survived nights without wood by pressing their bodies together and praying until the blood remembered its duty. It sounded spiritual on parchment. In practice, it was survival disguised as sanctity. You smile faintly at the thought of those monks inventing theology out of thermodynamics. Maybe that's what faith really was, naming desperation something holy. The wind begins again, dry and thin, scraping frost off the rocks. You cup your hands and blow into them, watching the brief mist of heat vanish almost instantly. It's not enough. You think about every pilgrim who carried embers in small metal boxes to keep them alive for miles, tiny mobile hearths of hope. You have no such box, no coal, no wood. You only have yourself, and the faint memory of warmth lingering like an afterimage in your chest. You stop walking, close your eyes, and listen. Somewhere inside, beneath the noise of shivering and heartbeat, there's a dull thrum, the furnace of the human body doing its work without applause. You focus on it, breathing slower, trying to coax the heat outward. It's ridiculous, mystical nonsense, and yet after a while you swear it works. Your fingers tingle again, not from frostbite, but from blood returning. There's a small hollow ahead, a bowl of rock sheltered from the wind. You slide down into it, grateful for even the illusion of safety. The ground is hard but dry, and when you press your palm against it, you feel faint warmth, the kind that comes from sunlight trapped beneath stone. You lie there for a while, letting your body leach what it can from the earth. The monks used to say that all heat belongs to God, and by borrowing it you partook of divine generosity. You suppose that's one way to justify hugging the ground like a desperate lover. Still, It works. The chill recedes a little. You exhale and watch the steam rise toward the dim sky, the breath curling like a lazy ghost. You know you'll have to move again soon. But for now, you rest. Your thoughts drift to stories of travelers who survived entire nights without fire, relying only on shared heat. The Benedictines called it fraternitas thermica, brotherly warmth. There's one vivid account from 1276 about 3 pilgrims trapped in a snowstorm who built a small trench in the snow, lined it with straw, and lay pressed together until dawn. They swore they saw angels hovering above them, though the more cynical historians suspect that was just hypoxia. Still, the practice endured for centuries, less out of piety than practicality. You picture yourself among them, lying shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same cloud of frost, muttering half-conscious prayers into the dark. The image makes you oddly comforted, even though you're alone. You shift, wrap your cloak tighter, and murmur fraternitas thermica, just to hear the words leave your mouth. The Latin feels heavy, like old wool. As the day stretches on, you find small ways to cheat the cold. You discover that pressing snow under your arms numbs the ache enough to make movement easier. You remember reading how medieval soldiers did the same before battle, to delay frostbite by teaching the body not to panic. The logic is grim but sound. Pain ignored is pain survived. A mainstream historical fact bubbles up from your memory. Medieval armorers sometimes lined their breastplates with sheepskin because wool retained heat even when damp. You have no armor, but you have mud still clinging to your sleeves. You flex your arms and feel cracks form in the dried coating, releasing faint whiffs of earth. The smell grounds you. Dirt doesn't judge. By midday, clouds gather low, bruised and heavy, and the sky begins to spit fine snowflakes that melt on contact with your skin. You watch them dissolve. Tiny moments of warmth gifted and withdrawn in the same instant. You think about friction, fire's quieter cousin. The same monks who preached brotherly warmth also practiced holy rubbing, a ritual meant to kindle heat through motion. They'd strike flint not for sparks but for rhythm, rubbing stones together while chanting psalms. The idea was that even motion could be prayer. You decide to try it. You find 2 smooth rocks near the riverbank and begin rubbing them together in slow circles, murmuring nonsense syllables that could almost be Latin. The stones grow warm, so do your palms. You keep at it until the ache in your hands transforms into something close to satisfaction. When you finally stop, the rocks are faintly steaming, and you laugh aloud. Fire without firewood. Proof that stubbornness is its own element. The light fades early again, the mountains swallowing the sun before you're ready. You climb a little higher, following the faint path of an old wall that must have once belonged to a watchtower. Near its base, you find a shallow recess, barely large enough to crawl into, but it will do. The stones here radiate a whisper of warmth, perhaps from trapped heat, perhaps from your imagination. Either way, you take it. You huddle close to the wall, pulling your cloak around you, and begin to hum softly, the same way you did when the wolves circled. The vibration fills the small space, bouncing back against the stone, surrounding you in a faint echo of sound. It's like sitting inside a bell. You can feel it resonating in your chest, your throat, your bones. The warmth returns, not from outside, but from motion itself. You realize the monks were right about one thing. Stillness is death, rhythm is life. As the night deepens, you remember another peculiar tidbit from a 14th century traveler's chronicle, an account of monks who claimed to generate warmth by imagining light. They would sit in darkness, close their eyes, and picture the sun expanding inside them until they could feel sweat on their brows. Some modern scientists might call it visualization. The monks called it the inner flame. You decide to try. You close your eyes and imagine the sun you last saw, the one you barely felt. You picture it sitting low in your chest, just above the ribs, pulsing faintly. You feed it memories, campfires, candles, the glow of hearths long gone. Slowly, imperceptibly, your breathing deepens. Your fingertips tingle. Whether it's heat or hallucination, you can't tell. But for the first time in hours, you stop shivering. You whisper, "Fire without firewood," and the phrase feels like both truth and spell. The cold outside worsens. You can hear it in the way the wind claws at the cracks between stones. But inside your small hollow, you've made a tiny sanctuary of breath and motion. You press your palms together, rub them in slow circles, and imagine that every spark of friction is an answered prayer. The heat builds gradually, a fragile glow crawling up your arms and across your chest. It's not enough to burn. It's enough to remind you that burning once existed. You begin to smile. You think about those old monastic experiments, about how their strange rituals were half science, half stubborn poetry. The ancients weren't fools. They just refused to separate hope from physics. You decide that makes them smarter than most. You drift somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, still rubbing your hands occasionally, still humming your soft one-note song. Images float in and out of your mind. The frozen river, the wolves, the mud, the candle that refused to die. Each one glows faintly, like coals banked beneath ash. You realize that your entire pilgrimage has become a sequence of fires, some visible, some not. There's the warmth of mud, the warmth of movement, the warmth of memory. Each keeps you alive a little longer. Maybe that's what the chroniclers meant when they wrote that pilgrims carry the sun inside their hearts. It sounded sentimental when you read it in a library. Out here it feels literal. At some point, you open your eyes and notice something strange. The inside of your shelter is glowing faintly, not from flame, but from reflection. Outside, the snow has begun to fall thicker, and the moon, hidden until now, has emerged from behind the clouds. Its light bounces off the drifts, flooding your small hollow with cold silver fire. You laugh quietly. Even the world burns in its own quiet way. You hold out your hands, and the moonlight settles on them like powder. Your breath turns it into smoke. You whisper again, "Fire without firewood," and it sounds less like pride and more like gratitude. You stay awake long enough to watch the moon climb, your heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm of the wind outside. The warmth you've conjured begins to fade, but it doesn't vanish completely. It lingers like an ember hidden under skin. You press a palm to your chest and feel it throb once, twice, steady. That's enough. The body, you realize, is its own monastery. The ribs its walls, the lungs its choir, the heart its eternal candle. You let the thought settle over you, soft as snow. When you finally sleep, it's without dreams, without fear, just breath and faint warmth, repeating endlessly, and somewhere beyond the cliffs, the frozen river hums again, its unseen current moving with the same rhythm as your blood. The mountain exhales, the night listens, and you, the pilgrim who found heat in mud and motion, lie still and glow faintly in the dark, a human ember refusing to go out. You wake to find the snow behaving like an artist. During the night, the wind had carried thin curtains of ice dust across the ground, tracing delicate white veins over the landscape. Each ridge, each hollow, is now marked by faint, shimmering borders, a geography written entirely in temperature. You crouch down and touch the patterns, thin lines where frost clings thickly, and others where the snow has melted to expose darker soil beneath. They look like rivers on a map, or the cracked surface of a glazed bowl. You realize you're standing on nature's cartography, the mountain's private diagram of where warmth and cold wage their eternal border war. Pilgrims once called these markings the breath paths of angels, believing frost settled differently wherever the divine had recently walked. You smile at the thought, angels leaving weather instead of footprints. Yet, as you walk, you notice something practical too. The snow is softer in some places, brittle in others. The air above certain lines feels subtly warmer, almost as if these faint patterns reveal the safest way through. Maybe the pilgrims were half right. Not angels, but evidence. Not miracles, but memory. You follow one of the frost lines downhill, tracing it like a vein of silver. It leads through a cluster of stunted pines, their trunks bowed from years of wind, their needles heavy with ice that clinks faintly in the breeze. Each step makes a muted crunch, the snow collapsing under its own weight. The sun tries to appear but never fully succeeds, turning the entire sky into a kind of dull opal. You think of the word map, and how fragile the concept feels here. The mountain redraws itself every morning. No paper could keep up. A mainstream historical fact floats up from memory. In the 14th century, a group of monks from Aosta Valley attempted to record the routes of winter pilgrims across the Alpine passes. Instead of ink, they used soot mixed with fat, because it wouldn't freeze. The resulting maps, black smudges and faint white lines, looked more like smoke than geography. Historians later called them the first thermal charts, primitive attempts to mark not where things were, but where things stayed warm enough to survive. You pause and glance around, half expecting to see one of those blackened maps pinned to a tree by an invisible monk. You walk for hours, always choosing the paths where frost glows less intensely, trusting the subtle gradient of temperature beneath your boots. It feels absurdly scientific, though your data is mostly intuition. Once or twice you kneel to test the air, breathing in, exhaling near the snow to see how fast your vapor freezes. You could almost convince yourself you're conducting an experiment, if the lab weren't the side of a mountain, and the penalty for error weren't a frozen tomb. Around midday, the frost lines converge into a shallow valley, where the snow is thinner and the ground beneath gives slightly when you walk. You sense something hidden below, and when you kneel and brush the snow aside, your glove meets wood, a plank, smooth but old, buried just beneath the surface. You scrape more snow away and reveal the edge of what seems to be a structure, maybe a roof beam, maybe the remains of a bridge. The idea of human architecture out here startles you. You follow the line of buried wood until it leads to a dip in the valley, where the faint outline of a collapsed building emerges. The monks once built shelters like this, warm houses, they called them. Stations stocked with straw, blankets, and sometimes wine for travelers. Most fell centuries ago, crushed by avalanches or neglect. You dig until you find an opening and crawl inside. The interior smells of dust and rot, but it's enclosed, mercifully windless. A few remnants remain, a clay cup, half a blanket stiff with age, and painted faintly on the far wall, a circle filled with lines radiating outward, a sun, but one drawn as if by a trembling hand. Beneath it, barely visible, are words scratched in Latin, hic calor latet, here warmth hides. You trace the letters, the grooves deep enough to feel even through your gloves. Perhaps it was a warning, or a clue, or maybe just an inside joke from one monk to another. But when you sit down beneath the symbol, you realize the temperature truly is different here. A subtle, steady heat seeping from the ground itself. A geothermal spring, perhaps, or just a quirk of the earth's breath. You laugh quietly, because it's too perfect. Even buried under centuries of ice, someone left directions to a pocket of comfort. You take out your small pot, melt snow, and make the faintest suggestion of soup. Really just warm water with a memory of bark and the flavor of survival. You sip it slowly, leaning against the wall, eyes on the crude sun carved above. It flickers in the candlelight, each line glowing as if alive. You think about how monks once mapped these passes by scent and heat, not sight, sniffing for sulfur, watching where fog lifted first in morning, tracing the logic of warmth the way sailors read stars. You realize you've been doing the same, following instincts older than faith. When you finish your drink, you spread your blanket across the floor and rest for a while. Sleep doesn't come easily. The ground hums faintly as if alive, and the warmth, though welcome, feels unearned. You half expect the floor to open and swallow you. Instead, the warmth steadies, gentle and constant, like a heartbeat beneath stone. You imagine that somewhere below this mountain, Fire still moves, molten rivers running unseen, keeping everything from freezing completely. You whisper, Hic Keller Latet, not as translation, but as prayer. When you wake again, the candle has burned low, and the warmth has faded to a faint ghost of itself. You gather your things, step outside, and see that snow has stopped falling. The frost lines you followed earlier have changed. They twist differently now, forming loops and curls instead of paths. You realize that your brief heat has altered the local pattern. Your presence literally rewrote the map. The thought humbles you. Maybe every pilgrim does this, leaves invisible fingerprints of warmth behind, brief edits in the geography of survival. You climb higher, following the sun's vague direction. The air grows clearer, sharper. The frost lines thin until they vanish entirely, replaced by glittering snow that reflects everything like glass. For the first time in days, you see color again. Faint blues, pale yellows, the brown of rock emerging where snow has melted. The world feels new, freshly painted. As evening comes, the sky deepens to indigo. You find a ridge overlooking the valley you just crossed, and the pattern of frost below looks almost deliberate. Spirals and rivers, circles and veins, as if the earth itself were keeping notes. You kneel and use your finger to draw your own small map in the snow. A crooked line for the river, a dot for the hidden warm house, a faint X for the place where you first saw the miracle of mud. The gesture feels ceremonial, like signing your name in the mountain's guest book. You step back and look at your handiwork. Then, as if to remind you of impermanence, a gust of wind rises and erases it in seconds. You laugh softly, no longer frustrated. Maps are for those who need to return. Pilgrims, by definition, never do. You set your pack down, light your candle, and hold it close to the snow until its flame reflects in 1,000 tiny points, a constellation of warmth drawn on ice. You whisper again the words from the wall. Here warmth hides, and then you blow the candle out. The darkness that follows isn't cruel. It's neutral, honest, almost kind. You lie down in the snow, feeling the ground's faint residual heat, where the frost lines shift beneath you, and close your eyes. Above, the sky is streaked with pale aurora, ribbons of green and gold moving like breath. You think of the monks who charted warmth, the pilgrims who carried relics, the mud that hardened into armor, the fire that came from motion. All of it was mapping, in one way or another, tracing the shape of life against the cold. And now, as you drift toward sleep, you understand what those frost lines truly are, not boundaries between warmth and ice, but signatures of every traveler who ever refused to freeze. You smile, draw one last invisible line with your finger across the snow beside you, your contribution to the mountain's silent atlas, and whisper, Hic calor latet. Here warmth hides, and maybe for the first time it hides in you. The next morning arrives without sunrise, as though the sky has misplaced the idea of light. You wake beneath a thin crust of snow that fell silently in the night. A soft white blanket, both merciful and mocking. Every breath you take pushes small puffs of frost into the air that glimmer briefly, like tiny failed lanterns. The cold has settled deeper now, more deliberate, as if the mountain has decided that it's time to test whether you're still serious about survival. You rise slowly, your joints creaking like frozen hinges, and begin to move downhill through the pale haze of early light. Beneath the snow, you hear the faint hiss of running water. A stream, maybe. A sound alive enough to feel like a promise. You follow it. The snow thins with each step until the ground below darkens, and then, miracle of miracles, steam begins to rise from the earth. It pours from cracks in the rock, from narrow fissures like veins exhaling warmth. The air fills with the sharp mineral smell of sulfur and salt. You've found it, one of the mountain's hot springs, the kind that pilgrims once called the tears of the saints. You remember reading about them, rare pools where warmth bubbled up from the earth, surrounded by shrines built by grateful travelers. The monks wrote that bathing there washed away both frostbite and sin. You doubt the second part, but the first feels worth testing. The path narrows to a ledge overlooking a hollow. Steam rises thickly from below, twisting into the gray sky like incense. You descend carefully, the rocks slick beneath your boots. When you reach the basin, the world feels entirely different. The air heavy, wet, almost tropical compared to the dry cold above. The contrast makes you dizzy. You kneel beside one of the pools, dip a gloved hand in, and gasp. The water is warm, not merely less cold, but genuinely alive, radiating a heat that feels ancient. You pull off your glove and plunge your hand back in, watching mud and frost swirl away in cloudy ribbons. The warmth crawls up your arm, blooming slowly through your body. You cup the water, drink a mouthful, and it tastes of iron and stone, like liquid earth. A mainstream historical fact drifts into memory. In the 11th century, a community of hermit monks lived beside such springs near the St. Gothard Pass, building small chapels above the pools to honor the wounds of the mountain. They claimed that steam rising from the cracks was the earth's breath, a reminder that even suffering landscapes still exhaled grace. Their chapel burned in an avalanche, though legend insists the water beneath remained warm even as fire devoured the roof. You imagine them now, robed figures moving through mist, their chants echoing like thunder in a cave. The air thickens with steam until you can barely see your own hands. The sound of water bubbles everywhere, constant, soothing, almost hypnotic. You begin to notice shapes within the fog, faint outlines of columns, arches, maybe even walls. At first you assume it's imagination, but as you step forward, you realize the monks were here indeed, half buried beneath centuries of snow. The ruins of a small stone chapel surround the pools, its roof collapsed inward, its walls slick with moss and frost. You walk through what was once the doorway, tracing your fingers along the edges of broken carvings, halos, crosses, weathered faces, half melted by heat and time. At the far end stands an altar made of rock, its surface cracked but intact. On it lies a strange collection of relics, fragments of bone, maybe human, maybe animal, arranged in careful symmetry around a rusted chalice filled with frozen wax. You kneel automatically, not out of devotion but respect. The bones are smooth, polished by steam, their ivory sheen almost luminous in the shifting light. They're arranged like ribs around a heart, the mountain's anatomy laid bare. You realize, with a slow and quiet awe, that the monks built their chapel directly over the spring, not to harness its warmth, but to worship it. This place wasn't sanctuary from the cold, it was confession of dependence. You sit there for a while, the heat soaking through your clothes, your skin thawing until it prickles painfully. The sensation is almost too much. You hadn't realized how deep the cold had buried itself inside you until now. The steam makes everything shimmer, the walls, the bones, even your own reflection in the water. You look down and see your face distorted, blurred by the ripples. It doesn't look like you anymore. It looks older, carved from weather and endurance. You wonder whether that's what pilgrimage does, erases identity until only the act of moving forward remains. The air hums faintly, the steam thickens, swirling in eddies that seem to respond to your breath. You catch yourself thinking that maybe the monks were right. The earth really does breathe. You can hear it, feel it, each exhale rolling through the stone beneath your boots. You whisper a line that surfaces from nowhere, fire beneath bone. It feels like both observation and prayer. The warmth is intoxicating. You shed your cloak, then your boots, letting them steam by the poolside. You dip both hands in again, then splash the water over your face. It burns at first, then cools, leaving a strange tingling sensation that borders on bliss. You think about all those who must have done the same. Pilgrims, hermits, soldiers, each leaving traces of sweat, fear, and gratitude in these same waters. The thought links you to them, a lineage of exhaustion and wonder stretching backward through centuries. On the far wall of the chapel, barely visible through the fog, you spot an inscription carved into the stone. The letters are uneven but legible. Cor ignis, corpus glacis, heart of fire, body of ice. You laugh softly. It's the perfect summary of every pilgrim's condition. To walk through winter is to live in contradiction, to burn inwardly while freezing outwardly, to balance life like a candle between gusts. You whisper the phrase aloud, testing its rhythm. Cor ignis, corpus glacis. The echo lingers, caught in steam, repeating back to you as if the bones themselves are answering. A quirky tidbit comes to mind, one you once read in a forgotten travel compendium. It claimed that the monks of the St. Gotthard Springs could tell whether a pilgrim would survive the next pass by how quickly his reflection vanished in the water. The slow dissolving faces, they said, belonged to the stubborn, the lucky, or the blessed. You lean over the pool and watch your reflection tremble. The ripples distorted into 100 versions of yourself, some serene, some frightened, one smiling faintly as if in secret understanding. The surface clears. You're still there. You take that as a good omen. You stay longer than you mean to, soaking your hands, your feet, your thoughts. The warmth makes you drowsy, careless. Eventually, instinct nudges you. Move. You dress again, though every layer now feels heavier, soaked through with humidity. You linger one last time before the altar, tracing the circle of bones and whispering, Cor ignis corpus glacis. The steam curls upward in response, like smoke from incense. When you step outside, the world assaults you with cold, so fierce it feels like punishment. The moisture on your clothes freezes almost instantly, trapping the borrowed heat inside your skin. You begin to climb again, steam trailing faintly from your body like breath from a giant animal. Each step sends small puffs of vapor into the air, as though the mountain is slowly exhaling you back into its rhythm. As dusk settles, you glance back. The hollow below glows faintly from within, not with fire, but with reflected light from the steam. It looks alive, a heart beating beneath the ice. You think of the monks who built their chapel of bones and realize that their faith wasn't misplaced. They understood what most people forget. Warmth isn't absence of cold, it's defiance against it. You keep walking, repeating their phrase under your breath with every step. Cor ignis corpus glacis, heart of fire, body of ice. It becomes a mantra, a rhythm, a pulse. The air grows colder, the stars sharper, and somewhere behind you, the mountain continues to breathe through its cracks, whispering the same sermon it has preached for centuries, that even in the deadest winter, fire still hides beneath bone, and as the last steam fades behind you, you realize you're carrying a piece of that chapel with you, not its relics, but its lesson. You are for now both the ice and the flame. By the time you climb beyond the last curl of steam, the sky has turned a deep indigo that bleeds slowly into black, and the air feels carved from stone. The warmth of the hot springs has faded from your bones, replaced by a clean, almost metallic cold that cuts without cruelty. It simply is, immense, patient, and absolute. You walk until the ground levels into a narrow ridge, and then stops altogether, dropping away into a valley so deep it seems to swallow sound. You stand there for a moment, your breath coming in slow clouds, staring down into the darkness. The moon rises from behind the cliffs like a pale coin, and for the first time you see what lies below, hundreds, maybe thousands of small flickering lights, scattered across the valley floor like stars that decided to live on Earth. They move slowly, almost rhythmically, glowing through mist that drifts like smoke. You blink, convinced you're hallucinating from hunger or exhaustion, but the lights remain. Some float upward, others sway side to side, and a few blink out entirely before reappearing a moment later. Lanterns. An entire procession of them, winding through the snow-covered valley like a river of fireflies. You sink to your knees, too stunned to speak, watching as the lights weave and undulate, each carried by invisible hands. You've read accounts of this faint, half-legendary entries in old travel logs. The night of the endless lanterns, a phenomenon said to appear to pilgrims who'd survived the worst of the mountain. According to the stories, the lights belonged to those who never made it down, pilgrims whose bodies froze along the trail, but whose spirits kept walking. You laugh quietly, breath catching in the frozen air. Maybe that's what you are now. Half body, half echo. One more flicker on the map of ghosts. The thought doesn't frighten you. It feels almost comforting. You decide to follow. The descent is slow, treacherous, but the lanterns guide you. They don't behave like normal light. They seem to adjust for you, pausing when you stop, drifting ahead when you move. Sometimes they vanish behind ridges, only to reappear farther along, like breadcrumbs scattered across eternity. As you walk, the air fills with a faint, high-pitched sound. Not music exactly, but vibration, like glass bowls being played by invisible fingers. It makes your teeth ache but your heart calm. A mainstream historical fact slips through your thoughts. Monks traveling the Great St. Bernard Pass once carried oil lamps fitted with sheets of polished horn instead of glass, so that light would flicker softly rather than glare, conserving oil in the wind. The chronicles mention travelers mistaking whole processions of these for ghost fires, their glow wandering through snowstorms for miles. Maybe that's what you're seeing, not spirits, but memory, the mountain replaying centuries of light. You tell yourself this because logic is still a habit you haven't shed. But deep down you know logic never glows like that. You reach the valley floor, just as the first lantern drifts close enough to touch. It's smaller than you expected, no bigger than a birdcage, its flame shielded by thin sheets of translucent horn. You kneel and hold out your hand. The lantern wavers, hesitates, then slides gently toward you until it rests in the snow a few inches away. Its flame burns with a color you can't quite name, somewhere between gold and blue, too alive to belong to wax. You reach for it, but the air around it is warm, and your fingertips stop instinctively. The warmth feels human. You whisper, "Thank you," because it seems impolite not to. The lantern lifts slightly, as if acknowledging you, and begins to move again, tracing a slow path through the valley. The others follow, forming a single serpentine line of fire that winds between snowdrifts. You fall in step behind them, not as leader, not as follower, just another light in the chain. Each step crunches softly. Each exhale joins the faint chorus of sound that hums through the air. The warmth from the lanterns gathers gradually, and you realize the valley isn't nearly as cold as before. The heat of memory, perhaps, or faith. You've stopped distinguishing between the two. Eventually, the procession leads you toward a wide clearing, where the snow is strangely untouched. At the center stands a great wooden cross, old, cracked, half-buried, but unmistakably deliberate. Around its base lie mounds that might once have been cairns. You count 7 before the snow hides the rest. The lanterns begin to circle the cross, forming a luminous spiral, their glow intensifying until the valley looks like dawn, condensed into a single point. The sound returns, that crystalline hum, and now it feels less like vibration and more like language, though you can't understand a word. You close your eyes, not out of fear, but out of reverence. You remember a curious note from a 12th century chronicle by Abbot Odilo of Cluny. He described a vision of pilgrim souls traveling as lamps, not men, bound together by the wind. He wrote that each light burned until its bearer was forgotten, then joined others to form constellations over the Alps. You think about that as you stand here, surrounded by hundreds of lanterns burning without hands, forgotten, yet still moving, dead, yet still warm. The thought makes you smile. Maybe memory isn't a curse after all. Maybe it's what keeps the mountain lit. One lantern drifts closer again, the same one you think, and hovers at your eye level. For a moment you can see your reflection in the horn pane, warped by heat. The person staring back looks exhausted, hollow-eyed, but alive in a way that has nothing to do with pulse. The flame trembles once, as if laughing, then slowly fades until only the afterimage remains. The others follow, winking out one by one until the valley goes dark. Silence settles like snow. You wait for something, a sign, a whisper, maybe the sound of wings, but there's nothing, just wind, and the faint warmth still radiating from the ground where the lanterns passed. You kneel there for a long time, your breath fogging in the moonlight, feeling that residual heat soak through your knees. You realize you're crying, though the tears freeze almost instantly. You don't know if it's grief or gratitude, but you don't bother deciding. They feel the same now. When you finally stand, the stars have emerged in full strength, sharp and numerous, as though the heavens are imitating the lanterns below. You start walking again, not because there's anywhere to go, but because motion itself has become prayer. Each crunch of snow is an amen. Each inhale, a vow to keep breathing. A quirky tidbit resurfaces, something you once read about medieval pilgrims carrying tiny mirrors to catch candlelight from shrines, believing that when they walked at night, the trapped glow would guide them. You smile at the thought and pull out your own metal cup. It's dull, dented, but the moonlight catches in it, creating a faint reflection, a tiny, trembling lantern. You hold it close as you climb the next rise, your improvised relic flickering faintly in your hands. At the top, you turn back one last time. The valley below is empty now, but for an instant, just as you exhale, a faint shimmer ripples across it as if 1,000 invisible flames are bowing farewell. You whisper, Cor ignis corpus glacis, the phrase from the chapel, and the wind answers with a single soft gust that feels warm against your face. You keep walking into the night, guided not by stars, but by the memory of those lights. The mountain above you hums faintly, content, and you finally understand what every pilgrim who ever froze, prayed, or sang on these slopes discovered in the end. Warmth isn't something you find, it's something you leave behind. When dawn begins to touch the peaks with its first thin stripe of color, you're still moving. Your legs ache, your breath burns, but the rhythm of your steps feels infinite, part of the same current that once carried wolves, monks, ghosts, and lanterns alike. The world is quiet, except for the crunch of snow and the low sound of your heart. You look down at your cup, still catching a thread of moonlight, and laugh softly to yourself. The lantern hasn't gone out after all. It just changed shape. You whisper to the emptiness, I'll keep it burning. And the wind, always eager for a companion, seems to murmur back, then keep walking. The first true morning in weeks doesn't arrive with color, it arrives with sound. A long, low rumble slides through the spine of the mountain, soft at first, then building like a slow drum roll beneath your feet. It's not thunder, not wind, it's the world exhaling after holding its breath all night. You stop walking and listen as the snow around you trembles slightly, flakes loosening from ledges and drifting down in lazy spirals. The mountain is waking. You realize that means you've lived long enough to hear it do so. The horizon is a bruise of pale lavender, then gold, then white so bright it hurts. The light doesn't rise, it spreads, bleeding through the clouds until everything glows evenly, even the shadows. You feel it touch your face, tentative at first, then steady, and for a heartbeat you almost forget the meaning of cold. You drop to your knees in the snow, unable to stop smiling. The sun has come back to check on you, and it seems mildly surprised you're still here. The warmth that follows is fragile, like the first flicker of a rekindled hearth. It doesn't melt the snow. Not yet. It just softens it, the crust turning supple beneath your palms. You scoop a handful, and for once it doesn't sting your skin. You let it fall back slowly, watching it collapse into your footprints, smoothing over the path you took like forgiveness. You murmur, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The phrase escapes you by instinct, a remnant of the world beyond this mountain, that faintly comic reminder that somewhere, far below, life still speaks in jokes and echoes. You laugh quietly at yourself, the sound cracking through the frozen air. You rise again and begin to walk downhill. The slope is gentler now, lined with shrubs poking through the thaw, their branches tipped with frost crystals that catch the morning light like tiny glass bells. The air tastes different, not metallic anymore, but almost sweet, a faint scent of moss and thawed earth. Each step feels easier, not because the ground has changed, but because you have. The mountain hasn't softened, you've hardened. You think of all the layers you've gathered: mud, memory, frost, faith, each a form of insulation. Halfway down, you stumble across something that stops you completely: a patch of grass. Real, living grass, green as a whisper. It pushes through the slush like defiance incarnate. You kneel and touch it, half afraid it'll vanish. The blades bend under your fingers, wet and soft, impossibly alive. You press your palm flat against it, and it feels like a heartbeat, not yours, the Earth's. A mainstream historical fact wanders through your mind. Uninvited but welcome, medieval pilgrims often marked the end of a perilous journey by planting their walking sticks into thawing ground, letting them take root as small crooked trees. Some of those staffs, historians claim, still grow in hidden valleys across the Alps. You like that image, the idea that something born from exhaustion could turn into life. You look at your own walking stick, its wood splintered, its iron tip worn smooth, and smile. Without ceremony, you press it into the soil beside the grass. It sinks deep, easily. You leave it there, upright, a small exclamation mark against the horizon. The sky brightens further, and mist begins to lift from the valley below. Through it, faint shapes emerge. Rooftops, a bell tower, maybe even smoke rising from chimneys. Civilization, or something like it. The sight makes you strangely hesitant. You realize you've forgotten how to be among people. Out here, silence has been both company and confession. The idea of noise feels almost sacrilegious. You sit down for a while to delay the inevitable, watching the sunlight move across the peaks. It travels slowly, like a blessing reluctant to hurry. A quirky tidbit surfaces from the depths of your memory. One of those footnotes you never thought would matter. In the 14th century, a monk named Wulfric wrote that the holiest pilgrims were the ones who returned home unable to speak for 7 days. Not from pride or trauma, but because words are colder than what they have seen. You understand that now. You have no words for this quiet, this light, this simple act of not freezing. All you can do is breathe it in and hope that's enough. You begin your descent toward the village. The closer you get, the louder the world becomes. Birds you haven't heard in weeks, the trickle of running water, the hollow thud of snow melting from branches. The noise is both wonderful and overwhelming. At one point, you stop to drink from a small stream, cupping your hands in its icy flow. The water tastes like metal and resurrection. You wipe your mouth and catch your reflection in the surface, a face you barely recognize, cracked lips, frost-burned cheeks, eyes that look like they've been staring at eternity for too long. Yet there's warmth there, faint but stubborn, like a coal that refuses to die. You keep walking until the ground turns from snow to slush, then to damp earth. The path widens into a proper road lined with stones, and soon you see the first signs of habitation: a wooden fence, a half-collapsed signpost, the remnants of a shrine built around a blackened candle stub. You stop before it and light your own candle, the last one from your pack. The flame catches instantly, steady even in the morning wind. You set it beside the old stub and watch the two lights burn together, one gold, one gray. The air smells faintly of wax and thawing pine. You whisper a single line: "For whoever survives." It's the same inscription from the pendant you still carry against your chest. You hadn't realized until now how much that phrase has followed you, echoing through every frozen step. You press the pendant between your fingers, the metal warm from your skin, and close your eyes. There's no prayer in your head, only gratitude, and the peculiar peace of finally having nothing left to prove. When you open your eyes, the sun has climbed higher, and the valley below shines like water. The rooftops gleam, the bell tower flashes silver, and thin lines of smoke rise from hearths already awake. Somewhere down there, people are starting fires, boiling water, baking bread. The smell drifts faintly upward, impossibly rich. You breathe it in, dizzy from hunger, but smiling anyway. You'll reach them soon, but you don't rush. You've learned not to rush anything sacred. You take one last look at the mountains, vast, pale, immeasurable, and feel no anger toward them, no resentment. They were never trying to kill you. They were simply indifferent, and indifference, you've discovered, can be the truest teacher of reverence. You bow your head slightly, an informal farewell. The wind stirs, cold but gentle, and for a moment it sounds like applause. Then you walk again, each step lighter, the world widening with every breath. The frost beneath your boots gives way to puddles that mirror the sky. The light keeps growing, the warmth keeps spreading, and though the mountain remains behind you, you can still feel its pulse in your chest, steady, ancient, alive. As you near the edge of the village, your legs trembling from both exhaustion and relief, a curious calm settles over you. The journey hasn't ended. It's simply changed vocabulary. Pilgrimage, after all, never stops. It just learns to walk on warmer ground. You pause one last time, watching the sunrise paint the snow-capped peaks gold, and whisper a quiet goodbye that sounds suspiciously like a promise. The warmth of the new day drapes around you like a blanket. Your breath no longer forms clouds. The frost no longer bites. You close your eyes, exhale once, and let every sound, wind, bells, birds, fold gently into silence. Your heartbeat slows. The sun climbs higher. The cold releases its claim. And as your shadow merges softly with the thawing earth, the story that began in frost ends in light, leaving only warmth behind, steady and slow, until it fades like the last candle of night. End of script. Sweet dreams.